The heavy material produced after a supernova explosion is absorbed by a group of carbon-based organisms billions of years later to sustain life. We are actually children of stars. Keywords of the novel. Children of All Stars no pop-ups, Children of All Stars TXT complete collection download, Children of All Stars latest chapter reading. Chapter 1. Poetry. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Poetry. When a massive star enters its final stage of life, it will gradually cool from the center and begin to contract and shrink. The central heavy nucleus of a star is reignited under immense pressure, then expands and burns again. This repeated fluctuation ultimately leads to a highly intense explosion. Humans name this intense celestial activity supernovae. An explosion will throw a large amount of material from the star into the universe, including various metallic elements. This is also the only way for all heavy elements to be born in the entire universe. The human body contains about 45 types of heavy metals, which play a very important role in maintaining human life activities. In a sense, 8.5 billion people worldwide come from a supernova that exploded billions of years ago. Yes, we are all children of stars. Over 1,000 years ago, a supernova erupted 6,500 light-years away. The eastern sky of the northern Song dynasty remained bright for 30.3 days during this eruption. The explosion tore apart this massive star into what is now the Crab Nebula, leaving behind a powerful pulsar at its core. The powerful magnetic field of pulsars blows the surrounding nebular material towards space, towards Earth, and towards the children of the stars. The elements on the children's bodies intertwined under the wind of the stars, and then completely lost control. At 6 o'clock in the evening, in the duty room of the university-affiliated hospital, Lu Chen slowly and leisurely typed the keyboard. Today's work is not particularly heavy, just write 2 major medical records and a discharge summary. After finishing writing the medical record later, my girlfriend will probably be able to come out of the physics department's experimental building. Everyone is suffering a lot while pursuing a PhD. Dr. Liu is a clinical student in the Department of Rheumatology and Immunology, and his girlfriend Mu Jiran is a PhD student in the High-Energy Physics Laboratory of the Department of Physics. The dormitory building where the two of them lived was only 370 meters away, but Lu Chen and Mu Jiran spent their days together, feeling like they were in a long-distance relationship. The farthest distance in the world is not that I don't love you, but that you live in Shuangqiu and I live by the lakeside. You raise mice, I run particles. In Lu Chen's mind, thoughts were flying wildly. The junior sisters on duty walked into the duty room, humming strange short video background music, and then muttered, "Senior brother, the 42 beds are sick." Lu Chen, who was typing on the keyboard, pulled out his face from the computer screen and looked at his junior sister in confusion. After trying to recall for a few seconds, he asked, "What's wrong with you? What are the symptoms?" The patient with 42 beds is in the active phase of systemic lupus erythematosus. If she falls ill, she may have any symptoms. It's not lupus, it's a big breakdown. The junior sister sat down on the side seat with a fit of anger, picked up a signature pen from Lu Chen and stuffed it into her pocket. When I went to see in the afternoon, she was still fine, but in the blink of an eye, she grabbed me and started crying, saying, "Life is meaningless," and even said she wanted to take me to jump off the building. Lu Chen pushed away the keyboard in front of him, and an AI prompt popped up on the screen. This is a standard symptom of complex mental disorder syndrome, which requires prompt intervention. Looking at the expression on the junior sister's face, Lu Chen's nervousness relaxed slightly. At least the junior sister didn't seem to be affected, she was quite normal. CBD, complex mental and behavioral disorder, commonly known as the Great Collapse, is a severe psychological disorder that has no symptoms, is difficult to prevent, and has a certain tendency towards social interaction. Patients often firmly believe that the whole world is meaningless and life is a void. Only death can free them from this emptiness and meaninglessness. Moreover, Patients with major catastrophes are really driven by this pain to choose suicide. In summary, this is a very dangerous symptom. If there is no intervention, its mortality rate is almost as high as that of rabies. After turning his head to glance at the AI suggestion on the screen, Lu Chen asked, "Now she's being restrained. Who's watching?" Aunt Qian and the others put her on the bed, the junior sister said with a pout. "You go take a look. This person didn't undergo psychological screening before admission. In what era is it that people still have a big breakdown?" Lu Chen stood up and stretched lazily. A person's inner world is very complex. Some people just sit around all day and don't have too many problems. Some people have fragile nerves and always feel like they live in a simulation program. The Great Collapse itself is an unreasonable disease. After undergoing psychological screening before admission and being hospitalized for a few days, it's normal for them to get sick, isn't it? While chatting with his junior sister without a word, Lu Chen walked towards the ward. He had already heard the faint cries floating in the passage, and at the same time saw the dissatisfied patients rolling their eyes in the ward along the way. In the ward, a young woman was crying and shouting, "This world is all fake, and you are also fake. Let go of me. I want to be liberated, I want to wake up." Historical documentaries seem to be of little use. Nurse Qian sighed and asked, "AI suggests transferring people to detention facilities. Should we calm her down?" Lu Chen glanced at the documentary that was currently playing the Joint Government Announces Establishment section and shook his head for a moment before saying, "Amplify the sound, let's finish playing it first." Under the repeated impact of the Great Collapse, the remaining rational people gathered together, abandoning differences in geography, skin color, and ideology, and jointly announced the establishment of a coalition government. The background sound on the TV continued to play, and the struggle of the 40.2 beds also continued. The Great Collapse ultimately resulted in over 60% of the world's population dying, and the plague spreading on the earth. But reason will eventually overcome madness. With the continuous efforts of the coalition government and other survivors, human civilization has been able to continue, and we have finally come close to the truth of the Great Collapse. It is a spontaneous, irregular, and premonitory mental breakdown. It is different from any disease that humans have ever known. The documentary is still playing on TV, and Lu Chen leaned against the wall, bowing his head to send a message to his girlfriend Dr. Mu, about a physics joke he racked his brain after studying with research AI for 2 days. The thickening speed of physics journals has exceeded the speed of light, but this does not violate relativity because those journals did not transmit any information. Putting away his phone and waiting for his girlfriend's feedback on the joke, Lu Chen glanced at the progress of the documentary on TV. Now it's time for the coalition government to integrate resources and carry out salvage technology archaeology. Generally speaking, when these sporadic patients with major catastrophes see this, their condition can improve. If this passage cannot be relieved after reading, it will be more troublesome. Lu Chen frowned and found it easy to transfer the 42 beds to the detention facility. But later on, there will be a lot of tables and information to be added. It's troublesome to think about this. With this in mind, Lu Chen picked up the bedside case report from the 42nd bed. He is preparing to adjust the specialized medication plan of the rheumatology and immunology department, at least to ensure that the patient's condition has been controlled to a certain extent before being transferred to the detention facility. After all, detention facilities are professional medical intervention institutions aimed at the Great Collapse. If they only deal with lunatics, they can be considered good hands. But the immune system that has gone crazy inside the human body, that's not within their professional scope. While adjusting the treatment plan, Lu Chen prayed deeply in his heart, hoping that the historical documentary could reverse the patient's spirit and make her realize clearly that the world is real rather than virtual, and life has meaning rather than nothingness. As long as patients with major catastrophes can extract themselves from the perception of the illusory world, they can generally improve. Although there have been cases of recurrence and even gradual aggravation, most patients are still doing well. But many things always seem simple after the fact. At least personally, Lu Chen feels that even when the coalition government was just established, he probably wouldn't dare to propose an outrageous plan of using historical documentaries to treat suicidal tendencies. Otherwise, how could it be said that people in the past had more courage and wilder paths? After finally stabilizing and rebuilding human civilization, the coalition government conducted decades of research and discussion. And ultimately, a hypothesis was proposed. That human technology did not make significant progress for hundreds of years before the Great Collapse, and that the unchanging environment and lifestyle ultimately. Many people's brains gave birth to such a judgment. Human survival is meaningless, we are just pigs raised by machines. This kind of classical science fiction-like idea is like mold growing secretly under the sink, and at first no one noticed their existence. By the time people noticed it, they had spread to almost everywhere. Despite the sudden increase in suicide rates, everyone did not take this matter to heart. Suicide victims are just too mentally weak, and since they are not adapted to modern society, it seems that being eliminated through suicide is not uncommon. People with this attitude make up the majority in society, while the rest are only slightly sympathetic. When they respond with negative and mocking thoughts, the number of suicides and disconnections rapidly increases. Immediately following is the collapse of human civilization. Fortunately, the remaining rationality and survival desire of humanity have brought about a coalition government, as well as a way to prevent and solve the Great Collapse. In summary, for today's coalition government, promoting various technological advancements is the top priority. The documentary played the part of a large-scale human landing on the moon, and the crying patient seemed to have slightly improved in mood. Let's continue to observe. If you get sick again, please contact the detention facility. Lu Chen looked at the patient's basic vital signs again and then gave the doctor's order, I will go back and provide a suicide prevention care order. Sister Qian, please kindly transfer her over. Okay, Nurse Qian nodded and walked quickly to the bed. He stepped on the fixed lock on the four corner wheels of the 40.2 beds with his foot, and while unlocking it, Nurse Qian asked casually, Xiaolu, are you going on a date later? Lu Chen nodded and said, we're planning to go to Taowei Tower. Can we help you bring anything, Sister Qian? The food that you young people like to eat has a strong taste. Your sister and I might have to go to the nephrology department for an outpatient appointment tomorrow. Nurse Qian smiled and refused Lu Chen's offer, then blinked and said, the little girls on duty say that the clay pot powder in Taowei building is delicious. Don't you think you should take Xiaomu for something to eat? Lu Chen was taken aback for a moment, then expressed his gratitude seriously and said, Miss Qian, I'll bring you a fruit basket tomorrow. Lu Chen's phone rang and his girlfriend, Dr. Mu Jiran, sent a rabid expression that was pounding and laughing wildly. Do you know that we are all children of the same star? When he said these words, Mu Jiran sat in the small restaurant with a serious expression, as if he was delivering an award speech in the Science Hall of Stockholm. Sitting opposite her, Lu Chen was caught off guard by this sudden and endless sentence. After hesitating for a while, he straightened up from behind the steaming clay pot and looked at Mu Jiran, asking, is your description a poetic expression or a completely new academic achievement? It's a new hypothesis. Mu Jiran's eyes quickly began to focus and then locked onto Lu Chen's nose bridge. But I prefer the side evidence it brings. Lu Chen fell into silence again, unsure whether today's dinner together would be considered a date or a work meal, or whether Dr. Mu simply planned to engage in unilateral academic domestic violence. After all, he is just a clinical medical student, and if his girlfriend, who has already obtained a PhD in physics, says more than 3 sentences about her major, it is considered academic domestic violence. At first glance, it sounds a bit familiar, but if you listen carefully, you can't understand it. If you don't listen, it's not domestic violence, what is it? What does it indirectly prove? For men, the easiest way to express that they have truly listened attentively to their girlfriend's words is to grasp a key word and extend and develop it. But the degree of this extended development needs to be well controlled, otherwise it is easy to be seen as a provocation and subjected to physical domestic violence. This indirectly proves the theory that everything is connected. Mu Jiran blinked and looked at Lu Chen, asking in reverse, "Don't you always say that things are universally connected?" Although Lu Chen did want to explain to his girlfriend that universal contact may not be used in this way, considering personal safety, as well as his future happiness and facial health, he ultimately nodded and said, "You make sense." Mu Jiran nodded, although she didn't know what she was agreeing with, and then continued to lower her head and eat the clay pot noodles in front of her. After a while, Mu Jiran suddenly stopped his movements again. "What's wrong?" Lu Chen put down his chopsticks with great cooperation and asked with concern, "Do you want vinegar or some chili peppers?" "There's something I forgot to tell you." Mu Jiran gently pinned a strand of hair behind his ear and said seriously to Lu Chen, "I made some discoveries in the laboratory today. Humans may be on the brink of extinction." Lu Chen asked helplessly, "Is it another time after the Great Collapse?" Should this be a poetic expression? Mu Jiran thought for a moment, then picked up his chopsticks and picked up a tofu bubble that had absorbed enough soup. He blew it hard and then chewed on the deep-fried tofu bubble soaked in soup while blurring, "Part of it is poetic." "Which part?" "Maybe. This is a story about the apocalypse and salvation that will happen in the future. I hope everyone likes it." End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Rotation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Rotation. The term extinction is by no means an exaggeration or a potential threat to the future for humanity today. It is a reality that humans barely survive, and it is uncertain whether it will happen again. The slogan, "Everyone is responsible for dealing with collapse, always vigilant and optimistic," is like a symbol or flag. They leaned quietly against the wall of the university, occasionally swayed by the wind. Lu Chen and Mu Jiran walked on the shady road. The mottled moonlight swayed gently in the wind, as if the light and shadow in the water followed the waves. "It's so beautiful." Mu Jiran turned his back and squinted his eyes, looking at everything he could see with sincere emotion. "Life is so beautiful." At this moment, a doctor of science is no different from an ordinary little girl, and she is also deeply attracted by the beautiful scenery. And as Lu Chen walked beside her, all his energy now focused on the destruction that Mu Jiran had just mentioned. This is not because Lu Chen has any excellent qualities of never giving up until he understands the problem. He is simply unable to understand Mu Jiran's discovery and the assumptions it brings, so it takes more time and energy to ponder and understand. Mu Jiran's discovery was simple. During the experiment, she found that the lithium element electrons in dozens of collapsed human brain samples she had were all rotating downwards. Mu Jiran's discovery was like a brick lying quietly on the road in front of Lu Chen, with a note underneath. "You have already seen bricks, go and build the Great Wall now." He couldn't even casually throw the brick aside. After all, it had Dr. Mu's signature on it. So, Lu Chen had to take this brick seriously and meticulously, to deduce the details of the Great Wall that he had never seen before. If this arduous work were to be done before the establishment of the coalition government, it would definitely be able to force a clinical doctor to death. Fortunately, the times have progressed and the current situation has greatly improved. Thanks to the development and maturity of AI technology, at least intellectuals now have a brand new tool. Lu Chen also has an assistant who can inquire about countermeasures at any time. "Baozi, could you explain to me?" After pondering for half a journey, Lu Chen took out his phone and called out his research AI. What would happen if all the electrons in lithium were to rotate downwards? The AI named Baozi by Lu Chen sent a long standing expression of famous basketball player, ? JPG, through his phone screen, along with a more detailed mockery, "Brother, why don't I schedule a brain activity MRI for you now? You just have a problem with your cognitive function. Lu Chen murmured in a light voice, then stressed, this is your sister.in.law's hypothesis. That would be great, Baozi quickly said. Please allow me to download the Modern Physics Characteristics package to conduct a detailed analysis and understanding of this issue. The download package size is about 27 PB, and the estimated download time is 1 minute and 20.7 seconds. You guys just said that I had a problem with my brain, without knowing anything about modern physics, right? There may not be at least 102,399 megabytes of backbones in an AI with a size of over 100 gigabytes. Of course, Lu Chen was just muttering a few words in his heart. If he is willing, it will only take a few seconds to adjust the AI's response personality from the current high satire mode to the particularly polite Dongsang person. However, the feeling of being mocked by AI can indeed enhance his impression and memory of scientific research content. It is certainly easier to not remember the preparation methods of various reagents and buffer solutions at all, but this will always reduce the smoothness of the experiment. After remembering and mastering the relevant content, conducting experiments can also be easier. After about 5 minutes, Baozi, who had finished downloading and decompressing his studies, said, Big brother, are you sure that sister.in.law's original words are all electrons outside of lithium atoms rotate downwards? Okay. Lu Chen poked the OK button on the screen, then looked up at his girlfriend. She was squatting on the ground in front of her, using a small brick she had picked up to depict the shape of a tree shadow under the moonlight. This kind of back view looks really beautiful, and Lu Chen doesn't want Mu Jiran to explain the relevant concepts and content to himself, a quantum physics idiot, from the beginning. Firstly, this is a very significant discovery. As the temperature of the phone gradually increased, Baozi began to try to explain the importance of this discovery to Lu Chen. Please forgive me, I am just an AI. I cannot make precise inferences about things that do not exist in the database. However, this situation is impossible under the rules of modern physics, especially microphysics. Its significance is like: you discover that some people reproduce through egg laying, or that their spine is completely cut off but not paralyzed, or that metformin itself has no effect, it only produces various magical effects through psychological suggestion. Baozi attempts to explain this discovery with examples that Lu Chen can understand. In the traditional disciplinary system, in human experience, it is impossible for all 3 electrons outside the lithium atom to rotate downwards. After touching the 3 examples proposed by Baozi for a while, Lu Chen asked, so, does this discovery challenge the existing knowledge system? Baozi controlled his phone to vibrate a few times to simulate the movement of ridicule. Your description is very polite. My sister.in.law's discovery is enough to destroy the entire modern physics, especially quantum physics. Lu Chen's mobile phone screen quickly turned red, and a line of black small words floated out from above. If there really is hell in this world, then many physicists are probably trying to climb back from hell to humanity. If you want to understand which specific theories have been thoroughly challenged, you can refer to the following list of references. Putting away his phone, Lu Chen walked towards Mu Jiran. He doesn't understand anything else, but the pile of names on the list of literature is really impressive. Even laymen have heard of names one after another. Bohr, Pauli, and Schro. Which represent the greatest discoveries of humanity in the field of quantum physics. All appear in Baozi's literature list. The painting is really beautiful. After taking a few steps, Lu Chen quickly adjusted his mindset. Admittedly, the likelihood of these smartest people in human civilization making mistakes at the same time is not very high, but he also doesn't think his girlfriend would joke about such things. Without a doubt, the pressure that Mu Jiran is currently under is probably greater than anyone else. Even greater than those PhDs who have postponed their 6th graduation. If Lu Chen discovers on his own that dexamethasone cannot actually suppress the immune system, or even the heart has cognitive function. He will also bear tremendous pressure. This is a doubt about right or wrong, and even a questioning of one's own rationality. Years of learning and research have proven countless times the correctness of these theorems, principles, and foundations. And one's own backward learning is inevitably incomparable to those big shots who have guided the development direction of the entire school. So, when one's own discovery contradicts the discoveries and applications of the experts and countless other colleagues all along, any normal person would first start to doubt themselves. Is it because my experiment went wrong? Did I make an error in recording the experimental results? Is it something wrong with my brain? This kind of pressure is not something that ordinary people can bear. Lu Chen looked at Mu Jiran squatting on the ground, depicting the moonlight, and felt a little heartbroken. He reached out his hand and gently stroked Mu Jiran's back. Originally, when he came here, Lu Chen was going to say something to cheer up Dr. Mu, such as, "I will stand by you even if the whole world says you are wrong." Before the words could be spoken, Mu Jiran's instructions came: point to the right side is more itchy. After being scratched a few times, Mu Jiran instructed, you reach in and scratch, and the more you scratch through the layers of clothing, the more itchy it becomes. The feeling of being enemies with the world for you that was just brewing in Lu Chen's heart has all disappeared. All that remains is a little bit of the absurdity of being an enemy. Are you sure that now, on the shady road of school, I need to reach into your dress and scratch your itchy back? Oh, dear, this experience is a bit ahead of schedule for newlyweds. When the two of them returned to their walking state, Lu Chen had already calmed down a lot. Mu Jiran is much stronger than he thought. For the past 6 months, she has been repeating experiments almost every day to verify her findings. After 129 measurement experiments, Mu Jiran concluded from the data that all the electrons on the outer side of lithium did indeed rotate downwards in the human brain sample during the Great Collapse. In Dr. Mu's words, everything should be based on objective facts. Although she does not dream of, "I overthrew physics" all day long, she does not resist correcting the direction of the development of physics. The committee has already passed my subsystem verification. As they slowly walked towards the playground, Mu Jiran grabbed Lu Chen's arm and said, "But the request for the sample was not very smooth. The committee believes that I lack sufficient clinical medical background to use the relevant samples ethically and effectively." She looked at Lu Chen and asked in a low voice, "Are you interested in collaborating with Teacher Yang?" As if worried about Lu Chen's overthinking, Mu Jiran quickly added, "If you're not interested, come over and put on a name." Lu Chen stopped and looked at Mu Jiran very seriously, asking, "Your discovery may be the fundamental reason for the Great Collapse. The slow development of technology leads to the spread of suicidal tendencies, which actually has no logical basis. This is a very important discovery, enough to win the departmental award and even become an academician." Lu Chen frowned. "From an academic perspective, Yang and I are not the best candidates. You should at least ask the teachers in our school's psychology or infectious disease departments first, right?" I made this suggestion from the perspective of personal emotional life. Dr. Mu Jiran rolled his eyes and the two of them crossed the fence outside the playground and stepped on the track together. As long as my own experiment went smoothly, what does it matter to me if there are academicians in other fields? The playground has always been an excellent place for dates. The slightly glowing soft rubber floor not only has efficient and energy-saving lighting effects, but also creates a unique dreamy feeling. Stepping on the playground floor, the slightly deformed ground will bring ripples of light, making it look particularly romantic. The school playground also has the nickname Night Dog Slaying Field, which highlights the effectiveness of night dating here. Just as I walked a short distance on the runway, the entire playground suddenly heard a beep of beep 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 at the same time. Lu Chen, Mu Jiran, and other classmates who were taking a walk or being slaughtered on the playground simultaneously took out their phones. The prompt of an increase in neutrino concentration appeared on everyone's phone screen, and then the screen UI switched to the countdown. Starting from 15, 14, 13, 12, there's the aurora again. Let's just watch here. Lu Chen suggested proactively. It's too late to find other viewing facilities now. Sure. Mu Jiran's expression stiffened and he warned seriously, don't mention anything from 2 years ago. Lu Chen nodded with a worried expression and said, I want to live a healthy life for another 2 years and continue to strive for the health of the people for a lifetime. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. You need to work hard. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. You need to work hard. On that night 2 years ago, Lu Chen, who was far less mature and confident than he is now, sincerely invited Mu Jiran, who had just become his girlfriend for a month, to take a walk on the playground after dinner with a nervous heart. This kind of date invitation is not because straight men have no concept of romance. In fact, this invitation is Lu Chen's last attempt to almost burn his boat. After 4 dinners together, introduced by a friend, Lu Chen bravely made a request for a relationship with the most brilliant and only pearl on the crown of the School of Physics. But Mu Jiran seemed to have planned to refuse but said the wrong thing, and readily agreed to Lu Chen's request. Then, for the next full month, Mu Jiran refused 6 date invitations proposed by Lu Chen. The reason from beginning to end is, I need to do an experiment, I don't have time. It's like the Cold War-style breakup technique of, please figure out how much you weigh. Although I don't understand why a beautiful girl, after agreeing to date, she could have refused at the time, would use such a psychologically distressing way to force points. But Lu Chen still decided to give it a try. If she still refused, it would be better to quickly confirm the breakup. But this time inviting for a date, Lu Chen received a positive answer. This change caught him off guard and made him a bit nervous. Could it be that the other party couldn't wait anymore, so they decided to speak clearly in person? In the end, nervous and dying, Lu Chen saw Mu Jiran with a haggard face on the playground. The dark circles under her eyes and the pimples on her face both proved that her experiment was not progressing smoothly, while the trendy and fragrant hair tips represented her basic respect for this date. At least the girl's family washed her hair amidst her busy schedule. Taking a walk on the playground mainly depends on whether both parties have enough topics to discuss. If there are enough topics, there won't be any awkwardness. If there is nothing to say or not knowing what to say, the atmosphere at the scene will be very awkward. Fortunately, Lu Chen was confident that such an awkward atmosphere would not last too long. Although he is an ordinary straight man, he is by no means a reckless and resourceless man. After seeing the prompt message on his mobile phone that neutrino concentration is increasing and equatorial aurora is about to occur, Lu Chen quickly reacted and dealt with it scientifically and decisively, using extremely efficient decision-making and execution power to invite Mu Jiran out of the laboratory. As the two of them walked silently, green light gradually appeared in the sky, which caused waves of exclamation or laughter from the surrounding students. The playground was densely packed with people, and in the midst of the crowd, surrounded by the chaotic crowd, Lu Chen went straight up. He asked in a loud and clear voice as much as possible, how about being my girlfriend? Most of the time, it's pretty good, Mu Jiran said after a serious thought. In the sky dyed violet by the sunset, red and green light bands slowly changed shape. Under this spectacle, Lu Chen felt his brain boiling. The boiling of the brain is usually accompanied by changes in facial expressions. Under the equatorial aurora, Mu Jiran hesitated for a moment when he saw Lu Chen's face change as dramatically as in Sichuan opera, and then explained, I have never despised your intelligence. Don't listen to their nonsense. Yes, Lu Chen's girlfriend Mu Jiran is a person who is not easily guessed or even bound by common sense. But she does like Dr. Lu. Who wouldn't like a handsome boyfriend who is sincere, gentle, and a bit silly? It's quite cute, I love it. 2 years later, Lu Chen wrapped his arms around his girlfriend from behind and placed his chin on her head in a relatively comfortable position. Mu Jiran exuded the typical scent of a female PhD in high-energy physics. Due to her experiments, she didn't wash her hair for 3 days, and her oily hair was mixed with the smell of food she had just picked up in the Taowei building. Not unpleasant, on the contrary, there is a strong smell of fireworks. As the countdown ended, a flickering red color gradually began to appear in the sky, mixed with green and purple. Like ribbons dancing and swaying slowly in the high sky. A stunning aurora is occurring in a low-latitude area at 26 degrees, 25 minutes, and 17 seconds north latitude. I like watching auroras, Mu Jiran said in a slightly floating voice after a long time. When you watch auroras, you're watching auroras, and when you're watching changes, you're watching changes. There's no equation system, you don't have to worry about coupling relationships, and you don't have to worry about mean fields. What you see is what you see, and no one cares if it's just like. Every time there's such an opportunity, I feel like life is still very beautiful. Lu Chen looked sympathetically at his girlfriend and said, "You guys are really tired of working in physics. It's much simpler for us to experience the beauty of life. Has the patient's condition improved?" Mu Jiran speculated, "That's not easy, is it?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I don't have such high requirements. As long as I can sleep soundly during the night shift, I feel that life is very beautiful." The light blue ripples lit up, and Mu Jiran turned his back and circled around Lu Chen. "So, do you want to participate? I plan to apply for 5 units of experimental samples first. Can you also use these samples for your current experiment?" The romantic atmosphere created by the combination of aurora and the elegant blue light of the runway was instantly extinguished, and the crazy female scientist who conducted quantum physics experiments using human samples was relaunched. "And I haven't washed my hair yet. Why is it that you designed this subsystem for verification? Can you apply for so many samples?" Lu Chen didn't understand. A sample of the Big Collapse organization with 5 standard units requires at least 1 first-level Natural Fund project certification. Although there are a large number of crash samples, they are still human samples. It is not easy to conduct large-scale research on these samples, as there are ethical and moral risks involved. "I went to ask Teacher Tang," Mu Jiran explained earnestly. Teacher Tang thinks that in this situation, occasional abnormal factors cannot be ruled out. First, apply for more samples to make exclusion easier. Lu Chen nodded and said, "So Academician Tang signed your application, right?" He was already starting to feel sour. Although his boss is the director of the Institute of Immunology, he is basically an unknown person compared to Academician Tang, the mentor of Mu Jiran. Academician Tang started as a scholar in the river basin and worked his way up to 4 academicians of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, holding the title of a walking academic research tool. On the other hand, my boss, who is 36 years old and a professor, received funding from 10,000 outstanding young people and disappeared. I really can't compare. Lu Chen began to feel sour. And even when it gets sour, it's a bit overwhelming. My girlfriend is clearly engaged in physics research. Just because there is an academician who is the boss, this guy's collapsed human tissue sample can be applied for a full 5 standard numbers at once. On the other hand, as a clinical medical student, I wanted to create a set of 8. 1/20th of a standard number. Samples to verify my hypothesis. I submitted my application for 3 months, and in the end, I approved 3 reused samples. Reusable samples are those that have not been used by other experimental groups after application, or have been used without significantly damaging the integrity of the samples. The difference made Lu Chen squint his eyes. After pondering for a few seconds, Lu Chen didn't hesitate to take out the phone and start dialing. The bell rang more than 10 times, and the voice of his mentor Yang Weiman came from the other end of the phone. "Xiaolu, they haven't called me back yet. Don't worry, there shouldn't be a shortage of samples this time." "Yang," I suddenly understood a question. Lemon Essence. Lu Chen hugged her girlfriend and said over the phone, "We shouldn't be thinking about the number of clinical background committee members in the review committee, nor should we violate the rules of committee member turnover in the research committee. I came up with a solution that can fundamentally solve this problem. Yang Weimin took a deep breath on the other end of the phone. His years of experience dealing with Lu Chen told him that this kid probably didn't have any good intentions. Yang, you need to work hard and strive to be elected as an academician this year, Lu Chen said in a very serious and sincere tone. As long as you can be elected as an academician this year, then my experimental sample materials will not be lacking. As Lu Chen spoke, he tightened his body and defended against the physical social dissuasion from Dr. Mu, aka left hook in the abdomen. On the other end of the phone, Professor Yang Weimin fell into a long silence. Although I occasionally have a brain twitch as a student, most of the time I am still a reliable clinical doctor. This is also an important reason why Yang Weimin ultimately agreed to accept such a student. Clinical medicine is ultimately a profession that deals directly with ordinary people, the majority of non-specific populations. What other majors require is a sense of exploration and perseverance in finding answers to the unknown in the known fields of humanity. For this persistence, one can even make concessions on other social attributes. But clinical medicine is not enough, and even the opposite is true. You may not have such a strong academic talent, but your ability to interact with people cannot be lacking. Yang Weimin has always had this idea and has always demanded of himself and his students. He was very confident that Lu Chen also met this standard. He was not a fool or someone with no concept of socializing. So, how can such a person say things like, you should strive to be awarded an academician within this year, which is like a sequela of brainstem damage? Being elected as an academician is certainly not an easy task, Lu Chen said very seriously over the phone, so you must give it your all. I am your student, and I will definitely not deceive you in this regard. Being elected as an academician will be of great help to your research and career. Can you say something that I don't know? Rao sure is as good as Yang Weimin, and he is a little emotional when he hears this. I know that the 400 square meter flat floor is comfortable to live in, but I have to live in his mother. Lu Chen stood up and said, you can immediately send an email to Academician Tang, who is from our physics department. Please polish the content according to what I said. Looking at the aurora in the sky, Lu Chen said, we can help interpret Mu Jiran's experimental results and propose a possible theory that the Great Collapse is an infectious disease. To be more precise, it may be an infectious disease that spreads through quantum entanglement and causes disease by altering the magnetic declination characteristics of certain elements. Starting from today, let's put aside all the immune-related issues and quickly study quantum mechanics. Lu Chen faced the aurora with a smile and PUA to his boss, discovering a new way of causing infectious diseases and completely solving the mystery of the Great Collapse. This achievement can bring at least 2 academicians. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Dark Clouds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Dark Clouds. Infectious diseases known to humans must have 3 basic components: pathogens, susceptible populations, and transmission routes. Infectious diseases are inevitably composed of these 3 factors, and none of them are indispensable. But in Yang Weimin's view, even if Lu Chen is right, the Great Collapse transmitted through quantum mechanics may not be considered an infectious disease. At least from a micro perspective, there is no pathogen present in the entire transmission pathway. It's just through the inexplicable and playful methods of quantum mechanics, changing the direction of rotation of an electron. Rather than being an infectious disease, it is more of an opportunistic genetic disease. Everyone is a carrier of the Great Depression from birth. And the process that leads to the onset of the disease is basically completely random. Who knew that electrons would suddenly become entangled with something inexplicable? The onset of the disease is random, and all humans are carriers, which cannot be prevented at all, and it is even unknown where the source of the disease triggers. It's not so much a disease as a curse. Of course, this is only based on the information revealed by Lu Chen over the phone and Yang Weimin's own understanding. Specifically, it is still necessary to design meticulous and detailed experiments, and to obtain a large amount of data multiple times before reaching a rough conclusion. At the thought of the experiment, Yang Weimin felt a little feverish in his heart. Although Lu Chen has ulterior motives, he is not wrong. This is indeed a significant discovery enough to earn the title of academician. Besides explaining the Great Collapse, this discovery may even provide hope for solving many terminal illnesses. Yang Weimin himself is not an academician, nor is his teacher. In fact, apart from the founder of the school, Yang Weimin's faction has achieved little in scientific research. They are all teachers and doctors, but they are not very skilled or enthusiastic about scientific research. Now, there may be significant discoveries in the field of scientific research, and it may even bring Yang Weimin a title of academician of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. This made Yang Weimin tremble slightly all over his body. This shiver lasted until the afternoon. Come, sit. In his office, Yang Weimin generously took out 2 boxes of good tea that only the vice principal in charge of finance could drink. Personally brewing tea and pouring water appears particularly enthusiastic. Mu Jiran, who was being entertained, had a slightly awkward expression, while Lu Chen looked calm and normal. A man who could PUA his mentor, of course, could not shake his beliefs just because his mentor poured tea. Yang, this is the situation now. After drinking 2 sips of hot tea, Lu Chen began his new round of brainwashing tasks. The committee originally received Jiran's subsystem validation application, but now because of our joining, the entire subsystem validation application has to start writing the bidding documents again. Mu Jiran lowered her head and remained silent. She was still not accustomed to this blatant way of deceiving her mentor. But in order to cooperate with Lu Chen, she could only bow her head and remain silent. As usual, with Dr. Mu's acting skills, it may be revealing. In fact, the feedback from subsystem validation has been sent back long ago. If it weren't for the committee's demand for Mu Jiran to establish an internal team that is responsible and ethical, it's unlikely that Yang Weimin and Lu Chen would have been involved in this matter. I'm not familiar with this kind of bidding document, so I need to find a new consulting company to write it. Yang Weimin just gave this opinion and then self-deprecated, no, we have to do this ourselves. If academician Tang needs it, it may be difficult to find several experts with the titles of 3rd or 4th academicians to cooperate, but pulling out a top team in physiology, pathology, or cell chemistry. That's not really a difficult task. To give an inappropriate example, the group of people conducting research in the field of biology are like mastiffs wandering on the plateau. To outsiders, this group of people seem to be holding dozens of high-scoring articles in their hands, as if they were extremely proud of themselves. But in reality, they are all crazy dogs hungry. At least one academician's project can be brought out, that is, a large piece of delicious soft glutinous braised pork belly. In the face of such huge profits, many rules can be intentionally or unintentionally ignored. Some may even dare to ignore the intervention or even retaliation of academician Tang, and take the lead in conducting scientific research on this subsystem before publishing articles. In short, jealousy can make people look completely unrecognizable. To avoid trouble, Yang Weimin finally sighed and said, "Let me write the 2nd application document. I have a lot of experience dealing with the committee." As his mentor quickly completed his PUA, Lu Chen nodded and reported on his planned itinerary, "I'm on duty today. Later, I'll go to the physics center with Jiran to meet with academician Tang. I don't have many personal friends with Lao Tang. It's right for you young people to first get in touch with others." Yang Weimin nodded slightly and frowned. "Be polite and don't ruin good things. Academician Tang is a workaholic, and he is also a strange person who demands leniency from his students, takes good care of his colleagues, and is particularly ruthless towards himself. Of course, the part of workaholism is not particularly unusual, as any academician is a workaholic. If there is no fanatical pursuit or even hobby for work, achieving academician achievements is simply a pipe dream. But the remaining features are quite strange. Most other academicians have been labeled as tyrants at least hundreds of times in their daily work and teaching. The personality and habits of workaholics make it impossible for them to tolerate procrastination from their students or colleagues. In order to make others a support for their research rather than a hindrance, personal attacks on others are just the most basic means of urging. But Academician Tang is not a tyrant, his methods are much more effective than other academicians. Academician Tang himself is not in good health and often coughs or turns pale. If there is a mistake in the work progress of students or other colleagues, Academician Tang will never directly criticize like other colleagues. He will calmly invite this student or colleague to do other work, and then personally get started, working tirelessly to produce the results. Overall, even those who disagree with Academician Tang's theory in the entire Institute of Physics and even the physics community must sincerely say, Academician Tang is a good person. Now, Academician Tang Qinglong, the good person, sat behind his desk and helplessly spread out his hand with a bitter smile, saying, Dr. Liu, since you're here, can you show him first? Academician Tang Qinglong referred to him as a young person evacuated from the Mediterranean region. Due to the nuclear accident caused by the Great Collapse, the Mediterranean region has now become almost uninhabited. Thomas lived in the Mediterranean region until he was 18 years old and was evacuated to East Asia, where he was admitted to the Department of Physics at Central University. Nowadays, Thomas is an assistant researcher at the Institute of Physics, just like Mu Jiran, responsible for the research progress of a sub-project under the Quantum Communication Project team. Lu Chen couldn't hold back his clamor, it was entirely out of a doctor's respectful attitude towards life. This situation is too extreme. An adult male who has a fever of 39 degrees Celsius every day and has been burning continuously for 5 days. How could you still let him stay in the laboratory? Protein will spoil at high temperatures. If you burn it continuously for a golden week without going to the hospital, do you have to wait until your brain is slowly boiled into brain tissue by the low temperature? The first meeting with Academician Tang at the Institute of Physics turned into a sudden consultation, which made the scene a bit awkward. Fortunately, Lu Chen still remembers the instructions of his mentor and also remembers his profession. He quickly made up his mind and went to the surveillance room of the collider, where he twisted the boiled brain flour mixed with boiled egg and sent it to the hospital for treatment. The design and construction process of the circular accelerator collider are not simple. Humans are preparing to use enormous energy to accelerate two particles to a speed of 99.99% or above the speed of light, and then accurately collide the two particles to simulate the state of 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. The field of research on the collider at the Institute of Physics is more segmented, and it is a baryon collider. Explaining to outsiders that baryons are a type of fermion is painful, difficult, and meaningless. So Mu Jiran explained the value of this device in a very simple sentence: its cost is about 1/20th of the total cost of the Mars landing plan. This is equivalent to letting someone with a brain boiling to boiling water control 6 Mars landing spacecraft. Lu Chen walked in the middle of the team, conveying his anger and confusion to his girlfriend. Doesn't anyone think something's wrong with this? The collider has a very sufficient safety redundancy design. Although the control room is very close to the accelerator vacuum chamber, the wall poured with special cement is 4 meters thick, and there is also a 1 meter thick lead plate sandwiched in the middle. Academician Tang, who accompanied him, explained, General Engineer Du of the Special Engineering Institute said that this control room can withstand at least 1,000 tons of TNT explosions. Even if Thomas really has a mental problem, the control room can ensure his safety. Teacher Tang. Lu Chen asked after a moment of silence, are you not worried about the safety of the equipment? What are you worried about? Academician Tang Qinglong slowed down his pace and said slowly, no matter how expensive the experimental equipment is, it's better to buy a new one if it breaks down. I'm only worried about his safety. Life is not something we can create or make up for. Upon hearing these words, Lu Chen had something in his heart that he wanted to say, but he didn't dare to. So why don't you continue the experiment with a high fever for 5 days? After entering the surveillance room of the collider and seeing the patient with his own eyes, Lu Chen was immediately silenced. He realized that academician Tang couldn't be blamed for this. It was Thomas who locked himself in the control room. And it is evident that his mental condition has been affected. Anyway, academician Tang stood outside the door and talked to the walkie-talkie for a while, but the other party remained indifferent. A young man with sunken eye sockets and a dull gaze remained in the control room, his golden hair on his head completely devoid of luster. They drooped lifelessly on Thomas's head, looking like some kind of seaweed that had just been fished out of the water. The central air conditioning in the room is heating at full capacity, while Thomas, curled up in an ergonomic seat, is still wrapped in a thick blanket. Seeing such a scene, Lu Chen was not surprised. It is normal to feel cold even at a temperature of 36.7 degrees Celsius when the fever reaches this level. But I don't know if such a prolonged fever will damage his brain. Mr. Thomas, please open the door. Lu Chen started calling on Thomas to open the door as soon as possible through the walkie-talkie. You are sick now and need to go to the hospital as soon as possible. Thomas lifted his eyelids and glanced towards his upper right corner. Then he lowered his head and reached out his hand, struggling to type on the keyboard. His mental state doesn't seem to be quite right, Mu Jiran said in Lu Chen's ear. Although Thomas used to be a bit introverted, how could he not be like this? His brain is almost boiling into boiled eggs. Lu Chen felt a bit uneasy. Which boiled egg is mentally normal? Mu Jiran widened his eyes and said, can you still tell the mental state of boiled eggs? The back and forth persuasion had no effect, and it was not just Lu Chen who was restless. In the end, the huge cast iron door leading to the control room was still opened by academician Tang with the highest management authority. Led by academician Tang, 7 or 8 people entered the passage. The group walked for a full 10 minutes before finally entering the control room and controlling Thomas, who was curled up in a blanket. The ambulance has already stopped outside the passage, waiting to load people onto the vehicle, and then running towards the hospital with the sound of finished materials. Thomas's mental condition is definitely abnormal. He refuses to leave his seat and of course refuses to go to the hospital. His refusal has no legitimate reason, not even an excuse. He just doesn't want to. Tie Thomas to the rescue bed, and the ambulance drove towards the hospital with people. Academician Tang, along with Mu Jiran and others, tidied up the control room. It is not difficult to see from the mountains of automated experimental statistics on the ground that Thomas has not classified or archived experimental data since his mental illness. This is understandable. No matter how crazy the boss is, he can't rely on a boiled egg to organize experimental data. Lu Chen was originally planning to help with the task, but before he could move the printing paper a few times, his phone rang. The phone was called by a senior sister on duty at the hospital. Brother Lu, can you come back and take a look? Bed 42 suddenly started to have a fever. If a lupus patient has a fever, you can tell me to go back and see. Can I still live? Lu Chen complained. What are you going to do next? To give a glucose tolerance test to patients with type 2 diabetes. The fever is very serious. The intravenous injection of lysine and aspirin has reached 1.5 grams of BID, which is still 39 degrees Celsius. The little junior sister spoke in a panicked voice, Senior brother, come back quickly. I can't handle it anymore. Okay, junior sister has said so. Lu Chen put away his phone and prepared to leave in advance. The patient's situation here has changed a bit. Teacher Tang, do you still have time this afternoon? This time, Lu Chen came to meet with academician Tang, originally intending to introduce himself and Yang Weiman, at least to pave the way for future cooperation. I didn't expect to have to arrest someone and go to the hospital first, while academician Tang Qinglong had to take charge of organizing experimental materials. Then we can only make another appointment next time. Academician Tang also felt a bit embarrassed. He nodded and gestured for Dr. Mu to send him off. Mu Jiran had no intention of paying attention to her mentor. She frowned as she looked at the report in her hand, as if she was thinking about something important. How dare I let her deliver it? Lu Chen made a very conscious joke and walked towards the control room on his own. Before Lu Chen entered the control room, the sky was still clear for thousands of miles, but after leaving the control room, the sky was already covered in dark clouds. He looked at the gloomy sky and gently shook his head. I knew I would bring an umbrella. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Smoke. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Smoke. The condition of 40.2 beds is very serious, but this is not the point. The key point is that Lu Chen began to suspect that the 40.2 beds were probably not suffering from any autoimmune diseases at all. As a doctor living during the era of the coalition government, Lu Chen was both fortunate and unfortunate. Fortunately, since the establishment of the coalition government, humans have only discovered a completely new disease. The complex mental and behavioral disorder, CBD, commonly known as the Great Collapse. Unfortunately, there have been no new discoveries in the field of clinical medicine for a long time. Discovering new diseases is certainly not a good thing for the patient themselves. But it plays an important role in the entire medical community and even the biology department. Newly discovered diseases can inspire researchers from many perspectives. Every time a new disease is discovered, it is possible to study its pathogenic mechanism and discover more treatment methods for the disease. However, in this era of scientific prosperity, discoveries in the field of biology have lagged behind. Fortunately, Mr. William Thomson, Lord Kelvin, still remembers the lessons from his past, and experts in the fields of biology and medicine have not proudly said anything like, "The building of medicine has been solemnly completed." After all, under the dark clouds, there doesn't seem to be much difference between a medical building and a thatched cottage. The eradication of cancer still seems like a fantasy, and various rare genetic diseases are also consistent with treatment plans from decades to centuries ago. Scientific development may have brought hope for humanity to land on Mars, but it has not even been able to give patients with ALS an extra 2 years of life. The future is bright, but the current situation is disheartening. But fortunately, most common diseases still have treatment options. Otherwise, doctors may become the group most affected and hit in the Great Collapse. But now, it seems that Lu Chen has seen a strange, at least unknown sign of illness from the persistent high fever in his 40.2 beds. According to the analysis of Baozi, there are about 1,000 diseases that may cause patients to suddenly experience a high fever from steady state to 39 degrees Celsius. But there is only one disease that can maintain a high temperature of 39 degrees Celsius for more than 32 hours and has no response to various common fever-reducing drugs. Malignant high fever. Malignant high fever is a rare disease that lurks in the human body, like a sinister bomb. Normally, carriers do not have any symptoms or manifestations, just like normal people. But once the patient starts receiving general anesthesia, the muscles throughout the body will quickly spasm and raise body temperature. Under the combination of high temperatures exceeding 42 degrees Celsius and persistent severe acidosis, the human body will quickly fall into a death vortex of rhabdomyolysis, neurological and even systemic damage. And then die within a few hours. The analysis results provided by Baozi are so simple. There are only malignant hyperthermia as a disease that can cause persistent high fever in patients without any warning and is ineffective against antipyretic drugs. The problem is, this is definitely not malignant high fever. Lu Chen looked at the 40.2 cases and scratched his head with a clattering sound. Little junior sister's AI probably made the same judgment as Baozi's. Before the junior sister's phone was dialed, she gave the doctor's order for genetic testing to the 40.2 beds. The test results show that this patient does not have abnormalities in the RYR1 gene segment or CACNA1S gene. Genetic testing does not support the diagnosis of malignant hyperthermia. Dankulin has also been used. But her body temperature hasn't dropped yet. The young junior sister stood next to Lu Chen and whispered, "Senior brother. Why don't you ask Teacher Yang to come back and take a look? Please come back, this patient also has these treatment plans." As Yang Weiman's doctoral student, Lu Chen is quite clear about his mentor's methods. He comforted his junior sister and said, "First, treat the symptoms accordingly. Add ice blankets and caps. I'll think of a solution. 42 beds are definitely not malignant high fever. The genotype does not match, the symptoms are not correct, and the degree of fever is far less terrifying than malignant high fever. If a cat doesn't look like a cat, doesn't sound like a cat, and doesn't react like a cat, then it is highly likely that it is really not a cat. This principle also applies in diagnosis. Lu Chen believes that the 42 beds are likely to have some kind of disease, which neither he nor Baozi have seen before. This idea startled Lu Chen's body, and in that moment, he suddenly understood Mu Jiran's feelings when he discovered the downward rotation of 3 electrons outside of lithium element. Worry and self-doubt are certainly present, but more importantly, it is still excitement. It's the kind of excitement, like discovering a new continent, like seeing a scenery that no one has ever seen before. Moreover, Lu Chen is very certain that if this is indeed a completely new disease, there is no need to worry about atomic electrons, and Yang Ji's academician title is basically stable. But the duration of this excitement was still short, and Lu Chen forced himself to calm down again. The first priority now was to find ways to stabilize the situation of the 40.2 beds. As long as people survive, research can always be done. If the 40.2 beds are not rescued, then we will have to grit our heads and work with our family members, requesting their consent to hand over their bodies to the hospital for autopsy at the moment of someone's loss. The difficulty of this matter will not be mentioned for now, just making such a request after the treatment fails. Lu Chen himself felt unable to open his mouth. In order to avoid future difficulties, we must do our best now. Lu Chen ran to the hospital room wearing a white coat, and after seeing the 40.2 beds lying unconscious on the bed, he pondered for a moment and made a decision. Maintain the original cooling method and implement low freezing infusion. Intravenous infusion of physiological saline at 4 degrees Celsius. Check the patient's APTT coagulation time every half hour. Lu Chen decided to use some unconventional measures to control the patient's body temperature. If this cannot be lowered, then repeat enema with low-temperature physiological saline. Low-temperature infusion is a relatively common treatment option in neurology and emergency departments. The original intention of this outrageous plan was to quickly reduce the body temperature of patients with severe traumatic brain injury, thereby protecting the nervous system. Nowadays, it is appropriate for Lu Chen to use it in such a place. After giving the doctor's orders in the ward, Lu Chen returned to the office to make up some physics jokes to tease his girlfriend. As soon as his butt touched the stool, the table in front of him began to scream. After reaching out and groping on the table for a few times, Lu Chen pressed the audio playback system and looked at the gray avatar floating on the table, wondering, "Hello? Who is that? Dr. Lu, right?" A hoarse shout came from the other end of the phone, "I'm from the security department." "Hey! Why can't you see anyone with this thing again?" Lu Chen looked at the huge, voice-only, prompt below the floating avatar and decided not to bother guiding the security department's brother on how to make video calls. He asked directly, "I'm Lu Chen. What's up with you? Dr. Lu is like this. The emergency department just called us and said you let the patient you sent run away on their own." The brother from the security department said, "They actually sent me photos, and I want you to take a look." "Did you run?" Lu Chen hesitated for a moment before suddenly realizing that it was Thomas. The emergency doctors are very anxious. They said the patient's consciousness is still unclear and they don't know how to run out on their own. The big brother from the security department shouted, "We are already adjusting the surveillance footage. This person was arranged by Dr. Lu. Can you contact his family? Okay, let me ask. Lu Chen hung up the phone and started sending a message to his own Dr. Mu. The emergency department said Thomas ran away from the hospital. Can you see if he's back to school? If you find his trace, then hurry up and send him back to the hospital. It's hard to laugh or cry. JPG. After a while, Dr. Mu Jiran replied with a message, no wonder the door on the accelerator side has been locked again. Then there was no movement. Hello. Lu Chen looked at the news on his phone and felt like there were many cats rubbing around in his heart. It was so lively. Dr. Mu, won't you live stream it for me? After taking a glance, Lu Chen felt that the cat in his heart was rubbing against him more frequently. It is now 2:40 p.m., which is the time for Mu Jiran to conduct experiments without hesitation. It is unlikely for Dr. Mu to become a war correspondent. If he wants to watch the excitement, he can only go there himself. If the temperature of the 42 beds can drop, then this bustling scene will be settled. Unfortunately, there is no if in reality, and things may not always go according to people's wishes. Lu Chen threw himself back into work with a strong, I'm not happy, emotion, which was so intense that even the junior sister seemed a bit uneasy. She was worried that the reason why Lu Chen wore an image on his face was that she couldn't handle the fever in bed 42. Now Lu Chen not only cannot see the excitement, the patient's body temperature cannot drop, but also has to worry about the psychological condition of the junior sister. Lu Chen, who was typing on the case in the office, was restless and helpless, while also feeling a bit aggrieved. Do something good, not to mention watching the excitement, at least do something to shift my junior sister's attention. Lu Chen, who was staring at the screen, suddenly felt a bit dizzy. Then, he flew off the stool completely. All the objects around were violently shaking, and a loud noise immediately killed them, directly shattering almost all the window glass in the room. When Lu Chen regained his senses, he had already appeared in the ward. The world seemed to suddenly turn black and white, and his white coat was covered in dust and bloodstains scraped from somewhere. Everyone, including medical staff, is shouting in terror. But Lu Chen couldn't hear anything, his ears ringing in waves. Apart from tinnitus, he could only hear his heart beating wildly in his chest. Lu Chen tried hard to get a tourniquet from the dressing-changing car and use it to bind and compress the bleeding 30.7 beds. But he couldn't even touch the tourniquet. The dressing car looked like it had come to life and grown legs. No matter how hard Lu Chen tried to grab it, his fingertips couldn't reach his target. Lu Chen opened his mouth and spat out today's lunch directly onto the ground. He felt dizzy, as if he had just been thrown into the washing machine and thrown dry for half an hour. After wiping away the dirt from the corners of his mouth, Lu Chen finally grabbed the tourniquet. After using a tourniquet and dressing-changing forceps to complete the pressure rotation hemostasis, Lu Chen's hearing gradually began to recover. He heard cries, screams coming from all over, and various alarm sounds ringing outside the window. Looking through the bare window frame, Lu Chen saw a towering gray smoke column. Very close to the hospital and in the direction of the Physics Institute. He felt the blood all over his body cool. End of this chapter. 6, Chapter 6 Mystery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Mystery. The iron railing outside Central University is like rubber candy twisted and rubbed by a mischievous child. When passing by this iron railing, Lu Chen immediately recognized its origin. It was the iron railing outside the Physics Institute. It takes at least 800 to 900 meters from the Physics Institute to here, and the approximately 7 to 8 meter long iron railing, along with a half-person high cement foundation, is thrown directly near the main entrance of Central University. Lu Chen walked to the railing and took a deep look at the twisted wreckage. He couldn't reach Mu Jiran in the hospital. Although Baozi confirmed through online queries that Mu Jiran's research assistant AI is still working, this still cannot prove that Mu Jiran is safe. I can't even get through my phone, and I can't even reach my landline phone. Lu Chen had no intention of working in the hospital at all. Fortunately, there was no shortage of him, a hard-working rheumatology and immunology doctor. Yang Weimin, who rushed back to the hospital from home, quickly made a decision and asked Lu Chen to come to the school to confirm Mu Jiran's safety before rushing back to the hospital to help. However, Lu Chen couldn't even confirm his safety. The area around Central University has been surrounded by the Rapid Response Department. No unrelated personnel are allowed to approach the vicinity of the school, even if Lu Chen presents his work certificate and student ID. Dozens of soldiers equipped with urban tactical equipment, under the cover of robots holding high shields, quickly passed through the relatively complete wall outside the school, silently but swiftly moving towards the school. Lu Chen waved his documents in front of the blockade line, trying to persuade the soldiers and officers in front of him to let him in, using the excuse that, "I am a doctor and can provide emergency assistance." But the other party remained unmoved, and no matter what Lu Chen said, the answer was simply, no one is allowed to enter the blockade area without permission from higher authorities. Lu Chen took a few deep breaths, then turned his head and prepared to leave first. Since it doesn't make sense, there's no need to continue wasting time here. The length of the outer wall of the campus of Central University is at least 10 kilometers, and they cannot put up blockade lines in every corner. Fortunately, the heavens finally opened their eyes. As soon as Lu Chen walked out, a military officer stopped him. "Are you a student at Central University?" The other party asked directly, even rudely, "Are you familiar with the physics department? Have you been there before?" After learning about the relationship between Lu Chen and Mu Jiran, the officer nodded and said, "I can let you in, but you need to help my people. They are not familiar with the environment inside. Take them to the surveillance room of the collider, and once they arrive smoothly, you can go see your girlfriend." The other party's request was not difficult to accept, and Lu Chen decisively agreed. And the young officer also happily called a small squad of 8 people. "Your task is to quickly enter the control room of the collider and evaluate the damage caused by the collider," the young officer said to the 8 team members. "Dr. Lu will take you to the collider monitoring room. After arriving at the mission site, Dr. Lu can leave on his own." He paused and emphasized, "The rules of engagement refer to enemy area fire reconnaissance, and any target that shows obvious threats can be shot." When Lu Chen was sandwiched in the middle of the team by 8 soldiers and rushed towards the school, he suddenly realized a question. Why are there so many fully armed soldiers? Why are there still rules of engagement? Has the school become a war zone? Central University is a picturesque park-style university city. The Jihe River flows from northwest to southeast, running through most of the campus, and finally slowly flows into Dongyang Lake at the foot of Lushan. To the east of Dongyang Lake is the main entrance of Central University. Walking along the main entrance for about 10 minutes, you can see the lake surface on the left. And at the same time, you can also see Lushan. Lushan is a mountain peak with a very unique structure, and its height is not too high, with a relative elevation of only about 300 meters. But Lushan stretches and stretches within Central University, almost becoming a mountain range. The Lushan branch, which extends from northwest to southeast along with the Jihe River, is 7 or 8 kilometers long and is surrounded by the campus of Central University. Although it is a university, there is almost an entire mountain range in the school. The teachers and students of Central University have always had some opinions about this, even though the school has opened 6 tunnels under the mountains and even connected trams. In the end, faced with a surge of dissatisfaction and complaints, Central University chose to compromise. Anyway, the campus covers a large enough area, and the Student Affairs Office and Academic Affairs Office have basically placed all undergraduate dormitories and classrooms in the southwest corner of Dongyang Lake. Those who will cross Lushan every day are basically only the hard-working people who have to do experiments. The accelerator at the Institute of Physics is the most expensive and dangerous of all experimental facilities. Several generations of academicians from Central University and the Institute of Physics have been tugging back and forth for more than a decade, and finally both sides agreed to empty the southeast corner of Lushan and stuff it into a circular vacuum track and high magnetic flux magnet that is more than 10 kilometers long. The control room of the collider is located at the fourth peak of Lushan, and although the road to the control room is not deliberately concealed, it is indeed difficult to find. Under the guidance of Lu Qin, 8 soldiers held long spears and occasionally held them to warn the soldiers around them to stop. "Are you sure this is where it is?" The captain of this squad was a lieutenant. He put down his assault rifle and looked at the mountain path in front of him before turning his head and asking, "Dr. Lu, this really doesn't look like the entrance to the control room." Lu Qin remained silent for a long time. He only walked this road this afternoon. Moreover, there is only one road leading from the foot of the mountain to the control room, so even if you close your eyes, you won't go wrong. But now, Lu Qin doesn't know exactly where he is. Halfway down the road, it disappeared, and what appeared in front of me looked like a downhill slope. This mountain path runs through both sides of Lushan, and there will be no downhill unless you have reached the top of the mountain. Moreover, there is a lot of smoke and dust in this area, and the visibility is about 10 meters. Lu Qin really couldn't see the scene ahead clearly, but he still prepared to take 2 more steps forward and take a look. This attempt quickly failed. At first, there was nothing special about it on the mountain road. After walking a few steps towards the sudden downhill direction, Lu Qin felt a wave of heat that could be described as barbaric rushing towards him. It was like having more than a dozen high-power hair dryers blowing against his face, or as if he was directly approaching the oven with his face. In short, Lu Qin, who was thrown backwards by this heat wave, slowed down for a while before barely regaining his breath. "Release the drone and see what's going on ahead." Seeing Lu Qin from afar, approach the edge, fall backwards, and rub back onto the mountain path. After a series of actions, the lieutenant quickly gave the order, while he quickly ran towards the landing. "Dr. Lu, are you okay?" The lieutenant first pulled Lu Qin back a bit before asking, "What's going on ahead?" Lu Qin was momentarily speechless, unsure of how to describe himself. Fortunately, the drone that had already been released explained the problem on his behalf. In front of the mountain path, a huge deep pit suddenly appeared where it should have been a peak. The heavy iron gate and the tens of meters high mountain disappeared completely, leaving only a deep pit about 20 meters deep and 40 to 50 meters wide. The walls of the deep pit emit astonishing heat outward, and the heated and rolling air even makes it difficult for military quadcopters to hover stably above. The pit walls themselves are not blocks of soil or stones, they look like some poor quality black crystals, pieced together one by one. "It's not a conventional weapon," a soldier in the team said to the lieutenant. "If we only calculate based on the size of the crater, the explosive yield this time is about 150 to 200 tons. However, there is no radiation residue on site, and there is no abnormal background radiation." Lu Qin didn't understand these contents, and he didn't really care. After squinting his eyes and searching on the surveillance screen for half a day, Lu Qin reached out and pointed, "Here, this should be the passage to the control room." On the black pit wall, there is a gray horseshoe-shaped wreckage faintly exposed. Lu Qin stared at this position for a while, then compared it with his memory before confirming that it was the place he had walked this morning. "My task is completed," Lu Qin said as he turned his head and walked down the mountain. "I won't ask much about your task. Good luck to you." As an adult male, Lu Qin would naturally be interested in the potholes after the explosion. But being interested is one thing, until I confirm the safety of my girlfriend, no interest is more important than a fart. As for whether these team members can complete the task, this is not a concern for him as a doctor. He gradually quickened his pace, and after his feet completely left the range of Lushan, Lu Qin simply started running. After the recent encounter, Lu Qin actually relaxed a bit. From the moment he entered the school through the main entrance, he found that almost all the buildings in the school were intact. Occasionally, One or two windows break, but there is no serious damage to the building itself. There are also injured students, but it doesn't seem serious. At least they can still move, shout pain, and curse. Out of breath, Lu Chen ran downstairs to the Physics Institute, and at a glance, he saw Mu Jiran dressing someone in the open space. The heart that had been hanging in mid-air finally fell, and Lu Chen ran all the way to Mu Jiran's side. He then began to inspect his female doctor on site to see if everything was okay. Until he got a kick on his calf, and he realized that his movements seemed a bit indecent. Dr. Mu Jiran still doesn't know what exactly happened. She was tied out of the laboratory by her own junior brother. When the explosion occurred, Mu Jiran was debugging equipment in the radioanechoic chamber of the Physics Institute. In order to obtain the most ideal experimental data, the radioanechoic chamber of the Institute of Physics is a professional equipment that can achieve full radio wave shielding. The absorbing material on the outer layer of the full anechoic chamber is also an excellent soundproof and shock-absorbing material. Wrapped in a cone-shaped carbon sponge material several meters thick, Mu Jiran knows nothing about what is happening outside. The Physics Institute is located at the foot of Lushan, about a 10-minute walk from the control room. The explosion did not cause too serious damage to physics, and at least 80% of this miracle is attributed to Mount Lu. The fourth peak of Lushan leans more towards the southeast than the other peaks, and the hard foundation below the peak, as well as thousands of tons of C60 concrete poured into the foundation, have become powerful shields for resolving explosive shock waves. The explosion was unfortunate, but fortunately, it occurred near the control room of the collider. The control room survived the explosion, and although most of the instruments inside have been scrapped, at least this room is still there. The local monitoring system stored in the control room has been declared scrapped due to high temperatures and severe vibrations, but there are no issues with the remote storage system. The survival of the remote preservation system monitored by academician Tang Qinglong breathed a sigh of relief. According to the data from the monitoring system, it seems that this explosion was not an attack by some extremist organizations. Although the losses were severe, the entire collider was completely scrapped as a result. However, it's always a good thing not to be remembered by those with flawed minds. Academician Tang Qinglong originally thought so. Who? Thomas. Academician Tang looked at the middle-aged man in front of him, who claimed to be an insurance investigator, with some suspicion. After hesitating for a moment, he answered the other person's question. I don't know where he is now. The last time I met him was probably in the control room. At that time, Dr. Liu and I went to the control room together, opened the door, and took Thomas to the hospital. The insurance investigator standing opposite academician Tang is not tall, wearing a black suit, and holding a brown leather briefcase that looks full of usage marks. The investigator nodded and then asked, how does Thomas usually behave in the Physics Institute? Do he have good relationships with other researchers? He has a relatively introverted personality and is a very good theoretical researcher. Academician Tang pondered his choice of words. Are you here to investigate equipment damage? If you need to see the equipment damage list and go to the scene, I can have my assistant take you to the warehouse. This is also part of the investigation. The investigator comforted academician Tang and continued, you just mentioned at Dr. Liu. Who is he? I did not find any information about him in the report afterwards. He is my student's target. Academician Tang leaned back a bit and then said, if you need the cooperation of the clinical medicine school in the investigation, you need to send a letter to our school's academic affairs office and student affairs office first. After seeing off the investigator, Tang Qinglong quickly closed the door and picked up the phone with a gloomy expression. But the phone was picked up and put down several times, but in the end, it still didn't go out. This person is clearly not an investigator of the insurance company, and the insurance company's investigation only focuses on whether there is a reason for refusal to claim. But the other party is so interested in Thomas and Lu Chen, but hardly mentions the accident itself, which is not quite right. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Summoning. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Summoning. Thomas's current status is missing. But everyone in the Physics Institute, even everyone at Central University, knows that the PhD from this Physics Institute is probably dead. A video circulating online is said to be a surveillance video from the control room channel of the collider before the explosion. In the video, a stumbling figure ran along the passage. After more than 10 seconds, an extremely bright light filled the entire field of vision, and then the entire video came to an abrupt end. According to enthusiastic netizens at Central University, the person who stumbled and ran over was Thomas. It is also the only missing person in the entire explosion accident. The collision plane explosion resulted in 6 deaths and 1 missing. In theory, this level of casualties should not attract too much attention from public opinion, as accidents of the same scale occur almost every day. Today is the 3rd day of the accident, and the sudden spread of Thomas's video has brought the Central University bombing back to people's attention, and has also led to some concerning new situations. The coalition government was established in times of crisis and survival, and efficiency, objectivity, and rationality are all natural attributes directly engraved in the DNA of the coalition government. Daily announcements of the number of deaths from the Great Collapse, detailed statistical classification and disclosure of similar events, are routine operations of the coalition government. But it's been 3 days now. Not to mention the official data report, the coalition government has not even been able to release a rough, less formal press release. Abnormal, this is the best trigger for public opinion uproar. The human thirst for answers has reached an almost pathological level, and any abnormal thing must be answered and answered. It seems that only in this way can intelligent people feel at ease. Regardless of whether they can understand the answer or whether the answer is related to them. If they don't get an answer, they may even make presumptions for the sake of the answer. This kind of speculation at best and spreading rumors at worst is now emerging like mushrooms after rain. Even academician Tang Qinglong has been influenced by some factors. Rumors have it that Thomas is the little white face favored by academician Tang, but Thomas remained steadfast and never surrendered to reactionary academic authorities from beginning to end. Academician Tang, due to his love and hatred, tampered and caused the collision machine to malfunction and explode, killing Thomas and silencing him. Lu Chen silently closed the screen floating in front of him, and after a while, he muttered to himself, "No, not so much, right?" Lu Chen had seen Thomas with his own eyes and also felt that it was a bit excessive for academician Tang to let him go during his high fever. Of course, he will definitely not believe the rumors online. Talking to oneself cannot be considered believing in rumors. The hospital is undergoing large-scale renovation work, but to be honest, progress is slow. All the glass in the entire hospital needs to be replaced, and the treatment process for some patients who are inconvenient for transfer needs to be maintained. Not only the doctors, but also the engineering department and the workers who come to install new windows are causing headaches. In fact, the biggest headache is still the property cleaning department. Today is already the 3rd day of the explosion, and so far, there are still several floors of broken glass that have not been cleared. Most patients who can be transferred have been transferred. It's summer now. Central University is located in a standard subtropical region, and if there is no air conditioning in the summer here, it is simply deadly. And those patients who were injured by explosions, loud noises, and broken glass cannot wait for a long time in this environment. In recent days, all of Lu Chen's energy has been focused on handling discharge procedures. But he also didn't forget the special situation of 40.2 beds. Such a high fever that the current first affiliated hospital of Central University cannot treat. Letting go of an important paper is a small matter, missing out on a completely new disease is not a big deal, but letting go of Yang Weiman's academician title is not enough. Moreover, the 40.2 beds are now burned to such a ghostly state that releasing people from the hospital is no longer irresponsible. Intentional murder is more like that. The surrounding hospitals have tight beds and uneven levels, making it difficult to ensure treatment effectiveness. Finally, with Yang Weimin's active communication, 40.2 beds were picked up by the expert team of the Central Demonstration Hospital of the Academy of Medical Sciences. The expert team also made a very reasonable guarantee. If this patient is indeed a completely new disease, the first author will definitely hand it over to Yang Weimin and his experimental team. Anyway, this attitude is quite upright. Lu Chen was daydreaming while continuing to write his discharge report. Just as she finished writing the part about taking medicine after discharge, the junior sister sneaked over with a nervous and mysterious expression on her face. "Senior brother, have you heard about it? It is said that the explosion was intentionally caused by academician Tang himself. It is said that love gave rise to hatred, and in the end, people were killed and silenced. The progress of the situation after the explosion was vastly different from Tang Qinglong's expectations. The collider is a huge investment experimental project, and if such a serious accident occurred, the coalition government should have actively intervened in the investigation long ago. But there is still no news about the investigation team that should have appeared, and academician Tang even suspects that this investigation team does not exist at all. Those who should have come have not come, while those who should not have come several times. That insurance investigator has been appearing for several days in a row, and each time he will pull different students to ask various questions. Rather than saying he's here to investigate, it's more accurate to say he's here to clock in and handle errands. Tang Qinglong frowned twice as he looked at the black figure blocking people everywhere in the courtyard of the Physics Institute. He certainly cannot be an investigator for commercial insurance. Academician Tang realized at the first moment he met this young man that he should be a civil servant working directly for the coalition government. The incident of the collider explosion is not yet clear, even the exact location of the original detonation point is unclear. Academician Tang Qinglong has submitted reports to the academic committee more than once, requesting that the incident be investigated as soon as possible and that repairs be carried out on the collider. However, the response received by academician Tang was only, "Please maintain the scene and wait for investigation." Even if I directly ask my old friends in the academic committee, their response is like this. There is no novelty. The coalition government adopts this approach, even completely disregarding public suspicion, and does not care whether such a high investment in scientific instruments can still be repaired. Tang Qinglong frowned, feeling a bit regretful for putting pressure on the surveillance video. It seems that the coalition government has really found some problems. Just as Tang Qinglong was regretting his mundane headache, Mu Jiran pushed open the door of his office and knocked on it, asking, "Is it convenient for you now, teacher?" Looking at the polite but not many students, Tang Qinglong nodded very naturally and said, "Yes, sit down. Teacher Tang is really a good person. I just received a call from the review committee." Mu Jiran looked at Tang Qinglong and said, "The committee said that the safety of our experimental project needs further confirmation, and they will not transfer approved experimental samples to us until safety is ensured." Tang Qinglong looked up at Mu Jiran and then pushed her a cup of hot tea. Mu Jiran picked up the tea cup and his hand trembled slightly. After all, such a big thing just happened. It's understandable that the old men in the committee are a bit timid, academician Tang advised kindly. Don't be too anxious lately, wait a moment. After the committee confirms that there are no problems, the materials will be sent. Mu Jiran raised his head and then shook it again. You and Thomas are not in that kind of relationship, this is smearing you, she suddenly said. I don't understand why someone suddenly tries to attack you. When we encounter many hypotheses that seem to make sense, using exhaustive method to eliminate them one by one is the slowest and equally clumsy way. Tang Qinglong smiled and drank the warm tea in front of him in one gulp. The correct approach is to not interfere with other theories. We should continue experiments, accumulate data, and abstract theories that truly conform to objective laws. Don't worry about things outside of your academic life. You can't help, and it's also troublesome to explain these things to you. Tang Qinglong suggested, since the committee has stopped the transfer of experimental samples, can we use Dr. Lu's samples for a confirmatory test first? I support Teacher Tang on this point. Dr. Lu, who was eating in the Taowei building and feeling like his hands were not on his own after a busy day, stopped trembling and explained, the sample matter is quite easy to handle. I will send it to you tomorrow. How long will 3 samples be enough for you to use? About a few tens of seconds, right? Mu Jiran thought for a moment and said, it mainly depends on the difficulty of extracting lithium from the sample. A normal sample takes only a few tens of seconds. 2 people were chatting when Lu Chen's phone suddenly started calling out. Baozi bounced and waved on Lu Chen's phone, and only after confirming that Lu Chen had noticed it did it display a few lines of text on the screen. You go back to the dormitory first. After reading the information, Lu Chen threw down his chopsticks and walked out, even though he had only eaten 4 bites of this meal. Probably when will you be back? Mu Jiran asked, will we have breakfast together tomorrow morning? I don't know the specifics, don't wait for me yet. Lu Chen picked up his coat and rushed outside the door. I'll contact you if there's any news. Rushing back to the laboratory, Lu Chen was out of breath and threw his coat down the hallway. Pushing open 7 or 8 doors in a row, he finally found Yang Weimin sitting at the table without saying a word. What's the situation with Brother Yang? Lu Chen felt that both of his legs were a bit weak. The content displayed on the screen of Baozi is very brief, urgent, hurry back to the laboratory. The last time this title appeared was when Lu Chen and Yang Weimin had to provide emergency medical consultation for an astronaut in a manned space program on Mars. Something big happened. Yang Weimin pointed to the screen in front of him as if he had lost his soul. The demonstration hospital exploded. Chinese is a very broad and profound language, and Lu Chen naturally understood it as, too many patients, hospitals are packed. Although the smoke column on Lushan flashed through his mind for an instant, Lu Chen didn't really think much in this direction. Until he saw a mess on the screen and the deep pit that suddenly appeared on the ground. On the wall of the pit, there are black crystals. Within a radius of 500 to 600 meters, there is not even a complete building. That pit was once the core campus of the best hospital on Earth, and it was the inclusive campus of the Central Demonstration Hospital of the Medical Science Research Institute, which covers an area of 400,000 square meters. This hospital has 3,600 beds, and the maximum daily outpatient volume is close to 20,000 people. Now, on this land of healing and saving lives, there is only wreckage left. Yang Weimin closed his eyes with difficulty and said, the number of casualties is still uncertain, but just hospitalized patients. At least 2,000 to 3,000 people are needed. We're in trouble, Lu Chen said to Yang Weimin. Immediately transfer all the patients and report to the medical department. If they can't be transferred, let the nephrologist take over. Yang Weimin looked at his student with some confusion. Isn't this kid scared out of mental health? Before the collision plane exploded, Thomas had just escaped from our hospital. 42 beds had just turned over, and the Central Demonstration Hospital had also exploded. Lu Chen quickly said, although it really has nothing to do with us, there must be some investigation and inquiry. Let's transfer all the patients, otherwise there won't even be people checking the rooms. This idea is good, but it was executed a bit late. A man in a black suit and carrying a brown leather file bag appeared at the door of the room. He put down the file bag in his hand and took out a green document from the inner pocket of his shirt. I am an investigator from the 2nd Division of the Comprehensive Investigation Bureau. You can call me Fujimoto, he said. Although holding the green document in his hand, Fujimoto had no intention of opening the cover to let Lu Chen and Yang Weimin see the content inside. He pinched his documents and stared at Lu Chen with both eyes fixed on him, saying, Dr. Lu, you are suspected of 2 serious explosion cases. Now, I will verbally summon you. Now, please come with me. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Video Recording. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Video Recording. What is your relationship with Thomas? Why do you deliberately associate yourself with physics? Why are you related to both explosions? In a room where all the walls were covered with soft packages and even the floor was soft, Lu Chen was being repeatedly asked these three questions. Since he entered this room, these three questions have been asked hundreds of times by the interviewees in various tones, combinations, speeds, and even accents. It's almost like they're deliberately messing around with people in this way. It seems that no matter how you answer, no matter what level of protest you make, it doesn't matter. In short, it's about stirring up trouble. However, this level of torture is not a problem for a rheumatologist with 6 years of clinical experience. In his daily work, he experiences almost the same level of pain as he does now. Continuously being asked questions and answering repeatedly. In this mechanical question and answer, Lu Chen's thoughts began to spread around the corners of the wall. Why? Why did they determine that the collision plane explosion was related to Thomas? Why do the investigators care so much about themselves? When there is a lack of sufficient basic information, hasty reasoning is likely to yield answers that have little to do with the truth. Lu Chen could only endure and continue to play this question and answer game with the interrogators in front of him. All he can do now is wait for certain conditions to change, and wait for new information to be presented on the table. My stomach was hungry, full, hungry, my throat was hoarse, and then began to ache. After being detained for more than 16 hours, Lu Chen felt like he was almost reaching his limit. If there were no further changes, he would not be ready to continue answering questions. Alright, you guys go out. Just then, a middle-aged man in a blue uniform, holding a thermos, interrupted the interrogation perfectly. He held a thermos and gestured with his eyes that the two young interrogators could leave. After these two young people left, he twisted open the lid of the thermos with one hand and casually glanced at the interrogation notes on the table, which were almost piled up in small hills. After taking a few glances, the middle-aged man put down his thermos and dragged a half-person tall trash can from the corner of the room. Then he threw all the records from the 16-hour inquiry on the table into the trash can. Lu Chen calmly watched everything and then began to pick up his spirits. Whether good or bad, the change he had been waiting for over 10 hours finally came. Dr. Lu Chen. The middle-aged man spoke in a long tone, as if observing Lu Chen's reaction. Do you know why you were summoned? I heard the reasons why the investigator summoned me, Lu Chen said with great determination, carefully choosing his words. But I don't agree, I can't even understand these reasons. Oh, come on. The middle-aged man waved his hand like a fly, then stuffed the cigarette into his mouth and lit it. There's no need to talk about this kind of child teasing. There's no surveillance here, let's talk about something useful. Thomas had a close relationship with religious extremist organizations before. The middle-aged man first threw a heavy bomb, and he still had communication with the core members of the extremist organizations until recently. Lu Chen glanced at the middle-aged man, then lowered his head and stared at his shoes, but remained silent. As an extreme religious figure lurking in physics, Thomas is undoubtedly a dangerous figure who is very good at hiding himself. The middle-aged man spat out a large, thick smoke from his mouth, then scratched his forehead with his little finger and said, I reckon you don't know his true identity either. You may be relatively innocent in this matter. The main reason we've been holding you up for so long today is that we need to rule out your suspicion, the middle-aged man said naturally and casually, smoking while propping up the table. I only have a few questions here, you can answer them and go back. When did you meet Thomas? Why did you force him to be sent to the emergency room of your hospital? The middle-aged man took out a cigarette from his cigarette box and handed it to Lu Chen. After being rejected, he naturally stuffed the cigarette back into his mouth and lit it, then said, Sorry, let them bring you some chilled drink to refresh you. I met Dr. Thomas. Probably after being with my girlfriend. I remember chatting with Dr. Thomas when I went to pick her up at the Physics Institute. Lu Chen tried hard to recall what happened a few years ago and then said, on the day of the explosion, my girlfriend and I went to see academician Tang together. The original intention was to pave the way for future collaborative research, but I heard that Dr. Thomas had been suffering from a high fever for several days and he refused to go to the hospital, so you were performing medical actions at the time, weren't you? The middle-aged man nodded and then pressed the intercom button on the table, proposing to send 2 bottles of ice cola in. You said Thomas refused to go to the hospital. How did he refuse? I don't know the specific way to refuse, but it was academician Tang who entered the door opening password before we entered the control room and brought Mr. Thomas out, said Lu Chen. From this perspective, I speculate that his way of refusing to go to the hospital may have been just to lock himself in the control room. You mentioned a research project, and I didn't see any relevant information about it. The middle-aged man nodded and continued, you are a clinical doctor specializing in the clinical application of rheumatology and immunology. So, what collaborative projects can you have with the Physics Institute? Why did the Physics Institute choose to collaborate with you because of your girlfriend's relationship? Our collaborative project. Lu Chen's answer was somewhat hesitant, as this collaboration involved the research content of academician Tang and Mu Jiran. And the research content may only be a title or even a direction, which can enable competitors in the same competitive direction to achieve a comeback. The middle-aged man said nonchalantly, if you're worried about academic leaks, you can sign a confidentiality agreement first. I probably don't understand the research content you're doing, and there's academician Tang in it. The inquiry records still have to be sent to the academic committee for review. It's just a matter of time. After careful consideration, Lu Chen decided to accept this suggestion. People under the eaves have to bow their heads. The group of people from the Comprehensive Investigation Bureau can handle the tedious 16-hour interrogation process, and if they continue to carry it on, the consequences may be even more embarrassing. There is a confidentiality agreement, at least it can be considered as an explanation for academician Tang Qinlong. Our research is related to electronics, and you can also understand it as related to quantum. After confirming the effectiveness of the confidentiality agreement, Lu Chen began to explain his discovery. We and academician Tang's experimental team believe that the Great Collapse may have been caused by the rotation angle of some lithium element electrons in the human body. I don't quite understand this, so it seems that the committee's experts need to evaluate it. The middle-aged man finished his second cigarette and rubbed his hands before asking, do Thomas know about this experiment? I'm not sure about that, Lu Chen shook his head. However, from a chronological perspective, the likelihood of Thomas knowing about this situation is relatively low. By the time we proposed this hypothesis, he had already locked himself in the control room for several days. So, how did you get to know the suspect in the demonstration hospital explosion case? The middle-aged man suddenly changed his mind. You arranged her transfer procedures, and I have consulted other clinical experts. If this patient does indeed have the same symptoms as those recorded in your medical record, then she should never be transferred. Suspect. Who? Lu Chen showed a puzzled expression before suddenly realizing, oh, you said 40.2 beds. Well, Jean. What did Jean do? Jean Mayer, the middle-aged man reminded, you wrote her transfer application yourself, why can't you even remember her name? Since the collision machine exploded, I have taken dozens of patients out in just a few days, Lu Chen said helplessly. I can remember 42 beds named Rangna, that's good. I really can't remember the specific surname. So how are you sure that these 40.2 beds are the suspects in the demonstration hospital explosion case? The middle-aged man suddenly widened his eyes and raised his volume, asking, after transferring dozens of patients, how did you immediately connect her with the demonstration hospital? Her condition is special and a case that we highly value. However, after the explosion, the hospital environment was too poor, so we specifically transferred her to the demonstration hospital. Lu Chen was not angry, just sighed and said, "There are records of communication with the medical students at the demonstration hospital in my email. You can take a look." At this point, Lu Chen suddenly froze. He lifted his head and looked straight at the middle-aged man, asking, "Do you think Jean is a suspect?" Lu Chen and Yan Weiman planned to prepare in advance because they foresaw that they would definitely have to be questioned. But they did not anticipate that the coalition government's Comprehensive Investigation Bureau would directly lock 42 beds as suspects. How could the patient, who was burning and mentally unstable, have planned and carried out such a large-scale attack? Lu Chen suddenly realized that these people probably had no intention of finding out the truth behind the attack. They have their own purpose. Either it's for Academician Tang, or... No, it's for Academician Tang. Yang Gu is not worthy of such a high-level black hand. Just as Lu Chen suddenly realized that he had guessed the truth, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "We have very sufficient evidence to prove that Jean caused this explosion. There are surveillance videos here, and Dr. Lu can also take a look." After speaking, the middle-aged man immediately began playing a video in front of Lu Chen. This is a scene from a medical practice recorder of the attending doctor. From the UI of the screen, it can be seen that the attending doctor is Dr. Savar, an infectious disease expert. Lying on the hospital bed, Rana's expression was indifferent, her eyes were out of focus, and she seemed to have lost a lot of weight. Dr. Saval paced back and forth in the ward and communicated with other experts through walkie-talkies about the follow-up treatment plan. Suddenly, Dr. Saval raised his head to look at the ceiling, then quickly walked to the wall, opened the panel on the wall, and observed the condition of the UV light switch. Lu Chen carefully observed it and found that its position fully met the requirements. It was in a closed state. Let the people from the mechanical and electrical department come and take a look, and then check rooms 705 and 711. Dr. Saval said to his colleagues outside the door, "I don't know which room's UV light is on, my eyes are uncomfortable." After Dr. Saval finished speaking, he continued to turn his head and monitor Jenna's vital signs. And Lu Chen exclaimed, The middle-aged man glanced at Lu Chen and then turned his head to continue looking at the screen. The next second, Jean suddenly began to have violent convulsions. She is like a complete seizure or a tetanus attack with a twisted corner. The whole person suddenly bounced out of the hospital bed. On Dr. Saval's surveillance footage, a large amount of red and gray liquid emerged from Jean's eyes, nostrils, and even all the holes on her body. Her eyes began to roll up desperately, her mouth wide open to the point where her jaw was directly pulled out of place by muscle movements. Jean's already unhealthy grayish-white skin suddenly cracked, like a field after a long drought, with dense and deep grooves. Through the cracked skin, you can see the liquid coming out of the holes. Then, a white light flashed by and the scene came to a sudden halt. It was Jean who emitted white light. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Is afraid that it may not be. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Fear it's not. The middle-aged man thoughtfully moved the surveillance video back a few frames and happened to stop at the scene where Jean was covered in cracks all over her body. After looking at the image for a while, Lu Chen asked, "Since you have seen the entire process, do you still think that I have anything to do with the explosion? We are only investigating institutions, we will not make judgments." The middle-aged man regained his "handle it" expression and no longer had the previous aggressive feeling. "Dr. Lu, did someone issue a visitor card to you when Tang Qinglong signaled for you to enter the control room?" Lu Chen blinked his eyes and after a while, he replied, "No. Breaking the security system objectively leads to risk exposure." The middle-aged man muttered while writing. Just as he said a few words, he suddenly looked up at Lu Chen with a surprised expression and said, "Don't be nervous, this evaluation is not aimed at you. The investigation into you has basically ended, and in about half an hour, you can go back." When Lu Chen saw the azure sky again, he couldn't even feel any sense of relief from the disaster. Too tired, staying up for more than 10 hours, focusing and answering questions repeatedly. This idea has nothing to do with humanity at all. And the subsequent changes are even more exhausting. Now, as soon as Lu Chen closes his eyes, the last scene of Jin Na will emerge from the black smoke in front of him. As a doctor, Lu Chen has seen patients who died after ineffective treatment. But such a tragic and even desperate scene, not to mention having seen it, Lu Chen had never even heard of it. The fluid gushing out of Jin's body pores may be a large amount of denatured protein mixed with dead red blood cells or other cell fluids. That scene was so despairing that Lu Chen's first reaction was to deny its authenticity. That's a demonstration hospital. In such a high-level hospital, Jenna, who is receiving low-temperature treatment to relieve high fever, still cooked herself alive. This feeling of despair even silenced Lu Chen. He is very certain that he does not have the ability to accurately convey this sense of despair to others. He couldn't even explain to Mu Jiran why he almost blurted out in despair when he saw this scene, "It's better to give up early, die early, at least not to suffer so much." Speaking of the part about giving up early, Lu Chen took out the phone, looked at the time, and then stuffed it back into his pocket. "Why don't we go back to the dormitory and take a nap first?" That must be a good idea. I'm so sleepy now that I seem to have seen Dr. Mu. During this time, she should still be conducting experiments, right? Lu Chen started walking in one direction. But the choice of this direction is completely random. This is the workplace of the Comprehensive Investigation Bureau, and this special institution naturally does not have any public labeling. Lu Chen, who just came out of the Investigation Bureau, couldn't even find the north, let alone find the direction back to the dormitory. He didn't take a few steps when he heard a rapid sound of footsteps coming from behind him. Although he heard footsteps and judged that the sound was getting closer and closer to him, the mentally tired Lu Chen still couldn't react. When he finally turned around to take a look, a soft body had already hit him. Lu Chen sat on the ground after being hit, holding Mu Jiran, who was supposed to be in the laboratory, at a loss. After waking up from sleep and looking at the gloomy sky, Lu Chen couldn't figure out how long he had slept. The headache is splitting and the sky and ground are dark. Lu Chen reluctantly got up from the bed and sat by the bed for a while before recalling a few important moments. For example, the question that lasted for 16 hours, such as asking about the unfamiliar blue sky outside. And Mu Jiran, who knocked himself over and cried in his arms for a long time. And Jean, whose skin was cracked all over her body, with many dark red wounds cracking open. Lu Chen took a few deep breaths. He used to sleep without taking off his clothes, but now it's convenient. He can put on his coat and go out. After a quick walk and sending a message to Mu Jiran informing him that he was clear-headed, Lu Chen rushed directly to the office of the Physics Institute. After searching around, Lu Chen couldn't see academician Tang Qinlong. According to the assistant teacher, academician Tang went to attend the regular meeting of the academic committee this morning and is expected to be back tomorrow. Physics was overwhelmed, which made Lu Chen even more anxious. After finding Yang Weiman in the biology building, Lu Chen's anxiety slightly eased. Seeing Lu Chen rushing through the door and entering, Yang Weiman was first surprised and then quickly began to comfort his student. They are also fulfilling their duties and not targeting individuals. Don't take this kind of thing too seriously. Brother Yang, something's wrong. Lu Chen's mind is in a mess. He has no time to play charades with his mentor. I saw the video. 42 beds, that's Jean. Lu Chen trembled as Luo Li began to recount everything he had seen. At first, Yang Weiman frowned as he listened, but as he listened, his heart grew colder and he became more worried. This kind of verbose and lack of focus description itself is not a problem, it may just be that one's own students have not rested well and their emotions are too tense. But the content of this description doesn't sound ordinary or abnormal. There is a limit to human body temperature, and if one only generates heat on their own, the limit will not exceed 43 degrees Celsius. But there are exceptions to this situation. The high fever caused by heatstroke may cause a person's body temperature to exceed this threshold. But there is no risk of heatstroke for Jean, her only risk should be hypothermia. There is a limit to the amount of heat that the human body can generate, and there is also a limit to heat dissipation. Generally speaking, the short-term heat generation limit of the human body is about 1000 watts, while the heat dissipation limit at room temperature is 400 watts. A rough estimate of the cooling methods provided by the demonstration hospital for Jenna is that there is an additional 800 watts of heat dissipation capacity. At this level, let alone a decrease in Jenna's body temperature, it should at least remain stable. Anyway, the physiological structure of humans determines that under the suppression of such means, Jenna could never have cooked herself alive. Even if cooked, it still takes a long time. Low-temperature slow cooking already takes more than 10 hours to start. But the scene in the video is completely different. In the video that Lu Chen saw, Rana's vital signs had always been quite stable. Until the deadly crack occurred without any warning. Lu Chen carefully recalled several times, and he was very certain that it only took a few seconds from everything was normal to cracking all over the body. Dr. Savar, who used a medical recorder, was unable to provide any treatment for Jenna, and the cracked Jenna turned into white light. I remember you said, Thomas also had a persistent high fever before, right? As a medical expert, Yang Weiman is extremely sensitive to clinical symptoms. Persistent high fever, this may be a symptom. What are you talking about, Brother Yang? Lu Chen was speechless. What type of disease can turn people into light? The Ultraman virus. Speaking of the consequences of cracking, both Lu Chen and Yang Weiman fell silent. Finally, Lu Chen asked first, has the accident report been issued? The number of deaths is still being counted, but it is expected that the number of people in the demonstration hospital at that time will not be less than 10,000. Yang Weiman lowered his gaze and wanted to say something, but ultimately ended this emotion with silence. After the Great Collapse, people exhibited astonishing severe schizophrenia in large-scale death events. Every life is worth cherishing twice, but suddenly dying thousands or even tens of thousands of people at the same time. This is not particularly unimaginable. Apart from sighing, there is really nothing to do. Brother Yang, this time your evaluation of academician may have to be postponed for a while. Lu Chen broke the silence and said, regardless of the cause of the explosion and who the mastermind behind it is, I think someone intends to take advantage of this opportunity to make it difficult for academician Tang. Lu Chen's judgment came from that mediocre middle-aged man. The other party's attitude has almost reached a point where they have no intention of concealing it. Even if they enter the control room without bringing a visitor card, they can be labeled as breaking the security system. I don't know who he is and why he intends to make things difficult for academician Tang. But he is always an opponent who dares to fight against academician Tang. If he dares to blend in, Yang Weiman and Lu Chen may not even be considered cannon fodder, and in the blink of an eye, they will be crushed into flying ash. Yang Weiman also thought of this possibility. He frowned and asked, we can't get involved in this matter. I plan to give academician Tang a wake-up call, and the rest is up to him. Lu Chen spread out his hand, anyway, Jiran's thesis has also been produced, and graduation is not a problem. When he saw Mu Jiran again, Lu Chen clearly felt his girlfriend's low mood. He comforted Mu Jiran for a long time, but the effect was not very obvious. I can't figure it out. Thomas is quite good. Although he doesn't like talking, he is still very helpful. Mu Jiran felt low and leaned against Lu Chen's arms, muttering in a muffled voice, why is he related to extreme religion? In fact, when it comes to relationships, it doesn't mean he identifies with or participates in such organizations, explained Lu Chen to Mu Jiran, who was sitting next to the playground. Thomas may have a friend who joined an extremist organization, but he himself wasn't aware of it. After picking up Lu Chen, Mu Jiran, who returned to the Physics Institute, found that Thomas's locker had been tampered with. Before she could report to the security department, she saw a huge notice in the lounge. The notice states that Thomas is related to extremist religious organizations. And the announcement stated that the explosion of the collider was a carefully planned attack by Thomas. The relevant departments have started further investigation on this matter and may have detailed discussions with everyone in the near future. Mu Jiran doesn't know what others think, but she thinks Thomas doesn't have the motivation or ability to commit crimes. A high-energy physicist operating a collider experiment, where did he get such a high-yield explosive? And even if it is a deliberate act of sabotage, why didn't academician Tang detonate it when he was present? Instead he had to escape from the hospital and then detonate it. If the purpose is to destroy and blow up the collider while also carrying the risk of killing a physics academician. Isn't that good? Mu Jiran couldn't figure it out. She stubbornly believed that Thomas had not planned the explosion. After listening to all of Mu Jiran's deductions, Lu Chen chose to shut up. The red aurora in the sky gradually dimmed, and Lu Chen, who had been staring at it for a while, suddenly said, "If Thomas was really wronged. So, Thomas's situation may be the same as Jean's." Lu Chen lowered his voice and said slowly, "The explosion happened to them. I'm afraid it's not a terrorist attack." "It's not a terrorist attack. What is that?" Mu Jiran turned his head and asked, "Is it an accident?" "I wish it were an accident," Lu Chen shook his head. "I'm afraid it's not." End of this chapter. 10, Chapter 10 Selection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Selection. In the morning, Lu Chen rode his retro motorcycle and slowly headed towards the energy station next to Dongyang Lake. Yesterday I chatted with Mu Jiran until midnight, which made it slightly difficult for Lu Chen to wake up in the morning. But no matter how difficult it is, it has to be overcome. Starting from today, Lu Chen has shouldered a brand new and important task. The tram crossing Lushan has been suspended for 4 days, and although the explosion did not completely damage the tracks, the inspection and maintenance of all lines have not yet ended. For safety reasons, the school has notified that the tram will be suspended for about 2 weeks. Considering the frequent need for himself and Mu Jiran to visit the Physics Institute and experimental area recently, Lu Chen finally decided to ride a motorcycle that he had not driven for half a year. I don't know if it's because the pressurization equipment is malfunctioning, and the metal hydrogen in the car weighs less than 10 grams. Lu Chen, who took half an hour to clean his car, slowly rolled it at the most economical speed and took another 10 minutes to drive to the energy station. This retro motorcycle was bought by Lu Chen as a means of transportation for commuting during his graduate studies. Despite the extreme development of public transportation, driving a vehicle with an internal combustion engine structure and experiencing the sensation of tire rotation is still a very tempting experience. Looking back now, Lu Chen still feels that he bought this motorcycle at a disadvantage. After buying a car, all planned trips were in vain. I work overtime or catch up on sleep during holidays, otherwise the weather will be extremely bad and I won't be able to leave. In summary, this retro small motorcycle, which uses metal hydrogen to reduce pressure, ultra-high pressure gas cylinders to convert hydrogen gas, and direct combustion drive in the cylinder, has become a second-hand car in stock. But it looks really nice, just stock up. Anyway, Lu Chen didn't want to sell the car. Good car. The young man has a good taste. The duty officer at the energy station saw Lu Chen's motorcycle from a distance. After waiting for Lu Chen to stop at the energy station, the elder brother first gave a high evaluation before asking the main question, "Can we replenish the energy or replace the tank? Can you help me take a look at the tank, big brother?" Lu Chen hung his helmet on the rearview mirror and pointed to his car. "It's been a long time since I drove it. Just as I started today, he reminded me that the pressure inside the pressure tank is abnormal. It's been a long time since you've been riding, and your car hasn't been moved in 2 months, right?" The big brother at the energy station looked more familiar. The reactants and hydrogen in the interlayer of the tank will be neutralized, and this reminder will be given. Just replace the tank. Lu Chen nodded, leaving enough space on the side to replace the energy storage tank for the robotic arm. He looked at the numerous private cars with high-pressure heads inserted in the energy station and asked, "Why is it so lively today? Can't it be that hydrogen prices are going up again? You didn't read the news?" Big Brother Chi said, "Bianchi port exploded early this morning, and the port facilities were all damaged. Our hydrogen supply in this region is all from Bianchi port, and everyone is worried that we can't make up for it, so hurry up and come." Encountered an attack. Lu Chen was somewhat surprised upon hearing this. Isn't it an accident? The official announcement has not been released yet. However, I heard that some sect has announced that they did it. The older brother scratched his head. I just mentioned it on the radio in the car this morning. I can't remember the specific content. Watching the robotic arm complete the final operation of replacing the energy storage tank, Lu Chen used his student card to swipe the bill and then boarded the small motorcycle again. What did I say? It's definitely not a problem, just grab it. After hearing the roar of the engine, the big brother was happy as if he had played a crucial role in it. He warmly shook his hand towards the landing, as if saying, "You're welcome," and then turned to charge other private cars. The internal combustion engine is started, and the vehicle's range display shows that it can still run 1,300 kilometers. Lu Chen turned the accelerator and headed towards the double-zone dormitory. The Double District is the largest, most advanced and scenic female dormitory area in the entire Central University. Unlike the lakeside where Lu Chen lives, the two districts are located on a small hill in Lushan. Here, you can also enjoy the unobstructed scenery of Dongyang Lake without worrying about mosquitoes disturbing the lake. This has also given the dual district a nickname of weak water in Central University. And places like weak waters are not easily passable. Lu Chen rode a motorcycle and registered 3 times in a row. The first inspection of the vehicle's safety facilities, insurance, and sound-absorbing pipes above the drainage outlet. Check the helmet and prepared passenger helmets for the second time to ensure they are within the safety period. Third, check if the clothing is neat and orderly. When Mu Jiran got on the car, Lu Chen described to her the 3 inspections he had taken along the way. Especially the third inspection of clean and orderly clothing is a bit outrageous. What is this to prevent? Mu Jiran, wearing a helmet, was also confused, but compared to Lu Chen, she had at least one possible suspicion. Did the girl who led the inspection dye a head of green hair and even perm big waves? Lu Chen nodded with lingering fear, and during the examination, it was this green-haired woman who was the most strict. She even leaned her nose against Lu Chen's helmet and asked in a low voice, "Why don't you fasten all the buttons?" "Oh, then it's okay," Mu Jiran nodded. "That's not a school checkpoint, it was set up by the senior sister of the School of Literature out of interest and hobbies. Can we still set checkpoints because of our interests and hobbies?" Lu Chen looked shocked. Isn't that becoming a car bandit and a road bully? At first, some people said the same, but they were all pushed back by Senior Sister Matsushima, Mu Jiran recalled. Senior Sister Matsushima said at the time, "We didn't forcefully block the way, let alone do anything to others. If a fool was stopped, it would only waste a few minutes of effort at most." The fool Lu Chen, who had been wasted for several minutes, fell into silence. He didn't know for a moment whether to express anger or just a chuckle was enough. "I heard that those who were stopped by senior sisters should all be internal medicine doctors." Mu Jiran handed Lu Chen a ladder just in time. "It seems that it is because you abide by the rules that you are easily stopped. I don't know how many girls living in the Double District have been treated by internal medicine doctors in the past few years. Has the situation become so serious that it requires setting up checkpoints to check people?" Lu Chen's motorcycle is not fast, but time seems to flow faster during chatting. Before long, a 4-story high physics center appeared at the end of the road. "Don't rush back yet," Mu Jiran stopped Lu Chen, who was preparing to turn around and return to the Institute of Immunology, as he got off the car. "Teacher Tang should have already returned. I'll go see if he's in the institute." Academician Tang Qinglong has indeed returned, but he appears to be somewhat troubled. After seeing Lu Chen in the office, Academician Tang did not shift the topic to the experimental project in just a few words, as before. After chatting with Lu Chen haphazardly for a few moments, he suddenly asked somewhat abnormally, "Dr. Lu, do you think the Great Collapse could really be an infectious disease?" "This is our hypothesis." Lu Chen replied halfway through and changed his mind when he saw the change in Academician Tang's expression. "Personally, I do think so. However, Teacher Yang believes that we cannot simply describe the Great Collapse as an infectious disease, as it is still different from traditional infectious diseases. I'm in physics, so I'm completely clueless about infectious diseases," Academician Tang politely said before asking, "How did people in the past discover and study infectious diseases when science was not yet advanced enough? This involves the professional content of medical history, but fortunately, Lu Chen has also studied it." After careful consideration of Academician Tang's question, Lu Chen chose to use the cholera outbreak on Broad Street in London in 1845 as an example for explanation. Cholera is a serious infectious disease originating from the Indian subcontinent, but due to inconvenient transportation in ancient times, patients with cholera often died of the disease before returning home. So, before the 19th century, cholera was always a severe and localized infectious disease limited only to the Indian subcontinent. But driven by the age of discovery, colonialism, and industrial transformation, cholera began to emerge from the Indian subcontinent. This tiny pathogen leaves the Ganges Delta and other densely populated areas of the water network, quickly spreading towards other areas. In the 25th year of the Jiaqing reign, cholera, which had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives in Afghanistan, Persia, and the Arab region, arrived in Jiangnan. This terrible disease has killed at least 500,000 people in the Susongtai region alone. At that time, medical methods in the face of cholera could only be described as a mild form of murder. And 34 years later, research on cholera finally ushered in dawn. Internal medicine Dr. John Snow produced a cholera map by marking the addresses of the victims of the cholera incident on Broad Street in Soho, London. And this map ultimately led people's attention to the well on Broad Street. The waterborne transmission of cholera was eventually discovered, along with the concept of public health. 29 years after Dr. John Snow drew the map, and 20.5 years after the physician's death, German bacteriologist Robert Koch finally isolated and discovered Vibrio cholerae under a microscope. This demon, who kills invisibly, has finally been captured by humans. And it has been a full 67 years since the source infection that caused the global infection crisis. The Kolkata cholera outbreak. It was not until 78 years later that quinolone antibiotics, which had excellent effects on Vibrio cholerae, were synthesized. From the spread of cholera worldwide to the birth of therapeutic drugs, it took countless chemists, doctors, and bacteriologists over 145 years. 7 cholera pandemics have killed approximately 138 million people in total. After listening to this story, Academician Tang remained silent for a long time. After a while, he looked up and said, "Thanks to not having a major breakdown at that time." Lu Chen didn't know what to say for a moment. In a period of 145 years, cholera killed a total of 138 million people. During the 5 years of the Great Collapse, at least 4.5 billion people worldwide died from the collapse and related events. At least, we have found a way to stop it. Academician Tang moved his body and looked up at Lu Chen, saying, "Your research project with Xiao Mu is very important. During this meeting, I talked to a few trusted old friends." Academician Tang's so-called trusted old friend is at least not someone who would snatch papers, and at least someone at the level of a member of the academic department. "My old friends are very interested in this idea, but they also reminded me of a blind spot. Do you know the observer effect? Academician Tang sighed quietly as he saw Lu Chen's expression of confusion. In the microfield, especially at the quantum scale of the electronic level, it is easy to experience observation leading to state changes. Academician Tang Qinglong took out a shiny copper pipe from a desk drawer and held it in his mouth. The blue LED light flickered with his suction. Your repeated measurement of the 3 electrons outside the lithium atom in the sample is essentially an observation. A white mist sprayed out, and Tang Qinglong spoke in a deep voice. The more frequently a quantum mechanical system is observed in a specific state, the more likely it is to remain in its original state. Lu Chen frowned and thought for a moment, then his brows furrowed deeper and higher. This means that our hypothesis can only be wrong, he asked as he looked up at Tang Qinglong. Otherwise, our observation would increase the risk of a major collapse erupting again. According to Lu Chen's hypothesis, the Great Collapse itself was an idiopathic mental illness caused by the downward rotation of all 3 electrons outside the lithium atom. The reason why it can cause over 4 billion people to commit suicide within 5 years is due to the eerie transmission channels of this disease. Lu Chen and Mu Jiran believe that the transmission mode of this disease should be quantum entanglement. The 3 electrons outside the lithium atom in the human brain do not all transform into downward rotation in one breath, and their entanglement also takes time. The quantum entanglement between people is even more abstract and covert, and no one knows how this entanglement occurs and how it ends. If we want to clarify this inference, it is necessary to measure and check a large number of samples. Then more samples will continue to maintain a downward rotation of the outer 3 electrons. And maintaining this quantity may further increase the risk of electron entanglement in normal humans. Tang Qinglong nodded slowly and then shook his head again. He put down the copper pipe in his hand and said, "You can't just look at the risks, but also at the returns." He raised his eyebrows and asked in response, "If your hypothesis is indeed true, how can we explain the fact that documentaries can treat patients with the Great Collapse? What is special about documentaries? They can restore the downward rotating electrons in the patient's body to normal. If through your research, we really have caught the Vibrio cholerae hidden in the intestines, then we have a chance to completely defeat and even eliminate the Great Collapse. Now, such an opportunity is in front of you. How do you plan to choose?" End of this chapter.